For 12 brutal years, no woman could break through to Ronan Hale. They came with hope, left with rejection. The rancher who conquered the harshest frontier couldn't conquer his own heart, until a woman with nothing to lose shattered every wall he'd built. This is the story of the man everyone said would die alone, and the stranger who proved them all wrong. Stay with me until the very end of this journey, hit that like button, and comment which city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The winter of 1873 had teeth. It came down from the mountains like a predator, silent and absolute, swallowing the Wyoming territory in white. The kind of cold that made men's breath freeze midair, that turned leather brittle and split wood down to the grain. The kind of winter that killed without mercy and took everything a man loved in a single night. Ronan Hale was 16 when it took his parents. He found them in the morning, huddled together in the barn. They'd gone to check on the livestock. His father's arms were still wrapped around his mother, as if love alone could have kept the cold at bay. It hadn't. The cattle were dead too. All of them. 40 head of prime stock, frozen solid where they stood. The undertaker came 3 days later, when the storm finally broke. "You got family elsewhere, son?" the old man asked, his voice rough with sympathy that Ronan didn't want. "No. The bank's gonna want their money. Your daddy owed—" "I know what he owed." Ronan's voice was flat, empty of everything except iron. "I'll pay it." The undertaker looked at the boy, tall but rail-thin with eyes that had aged a decade in 72 hours, and didn't argue. Some men were forged in fire. This one had been forged in ice. Ronan Hale paid every cent his father owed. It took him 4 years of work that would have broken most men twice his age. He hired himself out to every ranch within 50 miles, taking the jobs no one else would touch, breaking wild horses that threw grown men into fence posts, hunting wolves that had developed a taste for livestock, spending weeks alone on the range in conditions that made hardened cowboys quit after 3 days. He saved every dollar. Spent nothing on comfort, nothing on pleasure. Ate jerky and beans, slept on the ground, wore the same clothes until they were more patches than original fabric. By 20, he had enough to buy back his father's land and the neighboring property besides. By 22, he'd built it into something his parents would never have imagined, a ranch that stretched across 3,000 acres of prime grazing land, with herds that made other ranchers jealous and bitter. The town of Red Hollow watched his rise with a mixture of respect and unease. Ronan Hale didn't drink with the other men, didn't gamble, didn't joke, didn't waste time on the things that made frontier life bearable. He worked. He built. He expanded. His ranch became the largest in the territory, his cattle the finest, his horses the most sought after. But Ronan himself remained unreachable. "That boy ain't natural," old Frank Peterson muttered one evening in the Lucky Dollar saloon, nursing his third whiskey. 28 years old and never so much as looked at a woman twice. Every unattached gal for 100 miles has tried, and he turns them all down flat. Maybe he prefers, someone started to suggest. No. Tom Brennan, who'd worked for Ronan for 6 years, shook his head firmly. Ain't that neither. He just don't let nobody in. Not men, not women. Works alongside us fair enough, pays better than anyone in the territory, but you never really know him. You understand? It's like trying to befriend a mountain. Sure, you can stand on it, but it don't notice you're there. It was true. In 12 years of building his empire, Ronan Hale had turned away 17 different women who'd expressed interest, some subtle, some bold as brass. Sarah Miller, the doctor's daughter, who brought him fresh bread every Sunday for 3 months, until her father gently suggested she stop wasting her time. Catherine Webb, who owned the general store and once told him straight out that she'd make him a good wife, only to receive a polite but absolute "no thank you, ma'am." Even Clara Hastings, the widow with land bordering his own, a practical match that made perfect sense to everyone in Red Hollow, received the same cold refusal when she suggested combining their properties through marriage. "I'm not marrying anyone," Ronan had told her, his voice carrying no anger, no emotion at all. Just fact. "Not you, not anyone. I'd appreciate if you'd stop asking." Clara had left with her dignity intact, but her hopes crushed. That night in the saloon, her brother Daniel got drunk and confrontational. "What the hell's wrong with you, Hale?" he'd demanded, shoving Ronan's shoulder in the street outside. "My sister's a fine woman. Got her own land, her own resources. Pretty, too. Most men would count themselves lucky. Ronan had simply looked at him, that flat, emotionless gaze that made brave men reconsider their choices, and said quietly, "Take your hand off me, Daniel." The other man had, and quickly. "Your sister deserves a man who wants her," Ronan continued. "I don't want anyone. Clear?" It became clear to everyone in Red Hollow. Ronan Hale had no interest in partnership, in family, in anything that required letting another person into the fortress he'd built around himself. His ranch reflected that isolation perfectly. The main house stood on a rise overlooking the valley, a solid, functional structure with no decoration, no softness. Inside it was clean but stark. A kitchen that saw only the most basic meals prepared. A bedroom with a bed, a chest of drawers, nothing more. No photographs on the walls, no rugs on the floor, no curtains on the windows. It was the home of a man who lived there but didn't really inhabit it. His men respected him but didn't understand him. He paid them well, treated them fairly, but never joined them for cards in the bunkhouse or stories around the fire. He'd eat his meals alone, work longer hours than any of them, then disappear into that empty house where no light burned past 9 o'clock. "You ever see him smile?" Young Jimmy Carson asked Tom Brennan one day while they were mending fence. Tom had to think about it. Maybe once, when that stallion he'd been working with for 3 months finally took the saddle without fighting. But even then, it was barely there. Just a little pull at the corner of his mouth, gone before you could be sure you really saw it. "That's sad," Jimmy said. "That's Ronan," Tom replied, "and we don't question it if we want to keep working here." The truth was, Ronan didn't think of himself as sad. He thought of himself as safe. Every person you let close was a potential loss. And Ronan Hale had learned at 16 that loss could destroy you. His parents had loved each other desperately, and when they died, that love had meant nothing against the cold. Better to need no one. Better to depend only on yourself. Better to build something that couldn't be taken away by weather or chance or the cruel randomness of the universe. His ranch was that thing. The land couldn't leave him. The cattle couldn't betray him. The mountains that rose up behind his property would stand there whether he loved them or not. That was enough. It had to be enough. The spring of 1885 came late and violent. The winter snow melted too fast, swelling every creek and river beyond their banks. The Red River, which normally ran gentle through the valley, became a roaring monster that swallowed fence posts and uprooted trees. Everyone in the territory knew to stay away from the crossings until the water settled. Ronan was in the north pasture checking on new calves when he heard the shouting. Boss, you better come quick!" Jimmy was riding hard across the field, his horse's sides heaving. Ronan wheeled his own mount around. "What is it?" "There's a wagon tried to make the river crossing. Went over. Someone stranded on the rocks in the middle." Ronan's jaw tightened. Damn fools. Everyone knew better. But he rode. Of course he rode. Letting someone die through negligence wasn't in his nature, even if their own stupidity had put them there. When they reached the river, a small crowd had already gathered. Tom and 3 other ranch hands, plus a couple of men from neighboring properties who'd seen the commotion. "There," Tom pointed. In the middle of the raging water, barely visible through the spray, a figure clung to a massive boulder. The wagon was gone, smashed to pieces downstream. Somehow, impossibly, this person had managed to grab hold of the one rock solid enough to withstand the current. "That's a woman," one of the men said, squinting against the glare. Ronan was already stripping off his coat and boots. "Boss, that current'll kill you," Tom warned. "Water's too fast, too cold." "Then get a rope ready for when I come back across," Ronan interrupted, wading into the shallows. The water hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath, but he didn't stop. Years of working in every condition the frontier could throw at him had made Ronan strong. Not just strong, relentless. When he set his mind to something, nothing short of death would stop him. He fought the current with powerful strokes, angling upstream to compensate for the drift. Twice he went under, the water trying to claim him. Twice he came back up, spitting and swimming harder. The woman saw him coming. Even from a distance, he could see she was conscious, tracking his progress. When he finally reached the boulder, gasping and numb with cold, she reached down and grabbed his arm with surprising strength, helping pull him up beside her. For a moment, they just breathed, both clinging to the rock. Then she spoke, her voice somehow clear despite the roar of the water. "Took you long enough." Ronan turned to look at her properly for the first time. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair plastered to her face and a split lip bleeding from where she must have hit something in the initial tumble. Her dress was torn, her hands scraped raw from gripping the rock. She should have been terrified, hysterical even. Instead, she looked irritated. "Can you swim?" Ronan shouted over the water. "Obviously not well, or I wouldn't be on this damn rock," she shot back. Despite everything, the cold, the danger, the absolute insanity of the situation, Ronan felt something strange flicker in his chest, almost like amusement, almost. "My men have a rope," he told her. "I'm going to tie it around both of us. They'll pull from shore. You need to hold on to me and don't fight the water. Understand?" "I understand you think I'm an idiot," she replied. "I'm not. I know what to do." She wasn't an idiot. When Tom threw the rope and Ronan secured it around them both, she followed his instructions exactly. Held tight when he told her to hold tight. Didn't panic when the current tried to rip them apart. Kept her head above water even when the river did its damnedest to drag them under. The men on shore pulled hard, fighting against the current's strength. Ronan could feel his muscles screaming, could feel the woman's grip weakening, but he locked his arm around her and refused to let go. When they finally hit the shallows, strong hands grabbed them both, hauling them onto solid ground. Ronan collapsed onto the bank, chest heaving. Beside him, the woman coughed up river water and rolled onto her back, staring at the sky. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" Tom was asking, his voice urgent. "Should we fetch the doctor?" "I'm fine," she managed between coughs. "The hell you are," Ronan rasped, sitting up. Now that the adrenaline was fading, he could see she was shaking violently, her lips tinged blue. "Tom, get blankets. Jimmy, ride to town and fetch Doc Miller anyway. Tell him possible river fever." "I said I'm fine," the woman repeated, but her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely get the words out. Ronan ignored her protest. "Can you stand?" "Of course I can." She tried to get up and immediately swayed. Ronan caught her before she could fall. "Stubborn," he muttered. "Practical," she corrected, even as she leaned against him because she had no choice. Tom arrived with blankets, and they wrapped her in layers of wool. Ronan's horse was the closest, so he lifted her up into the saddle. She weighed almost nothing, which worried him more than he wanted to admit, and swung up behind her. "Where's your camp?" he asked. "Your people?" "Don't have any." Her voice was getting drowsy, the cold settling deep. "Not good." "Family waiting for you somewhere?" "No." "Where were you headed?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Anywhere but where I was." Something in those words resonated in a place Ronan didn't like to acknowledge. He kicked his horse into a steady trot, heading not toward town but toward his ranch. It was closer, and she needed to get warm faster than the 7-mile ride to Red Hollow would allow. "What's your name?" he asked, though he wasn't sure why it mattered. "Mara Vance." "I know who you are," she interrupted. "Ronan Hale. Everyone in 3 territories knows who you are." That surprised him. "You're not from around here." "No." She paused. "Not anymore." She didn't elaborate, and Ronan didn't push. By the time they reached his ranch, Mara was unconscious, her breathing shallow and concerning. Mrs. Chen, the cook Ronan employed who lived in town but came out 3 days a week to prepare meals and keep the house from becoming a complete disaster, was just arriving for her afternoon shift. "Merciful heavens," she exclaimed when she saw them. "Get her inside, Mr. Hale. I'll prepare the guest room and heat water." There was a guest room only because the house had come with multiple bedrooms, not because Ronan had ever intended to have guests. Mrs. Chen kept it clean out of principle, but in 6 years no one had ever slept there. Until now. They got Mara into dry clothes, Mrs. Chen handled that while shooing the men away, and into the bed under a mountain of quilts. Doc Miller arrived an hour later, summoned by Jimmy's urgent ride. "River fever?" the doctor asked, checking Mara's temperature and pulse. "Maybe. She was in the water for a while before I could get to her." Doc Miller examined her thoroughly, then straightened. "She's strong, lucky, exhausted more than anything, and she took some hits from debris, that cut on her lip, bruising on her ribs. But I don't see infection setting in. Keep her warm, make sure she drinks when she wakes up, and let her sleep. She'll probably be out until morning." "And then?" The doctor gave Ronan a curious look. "Then I suppose that depends on where she's going. You said she has no family. That's what she told me. Wagons destroyed, belongings lost. That's a hard start in new territory. Doc Miller packed his bag. She'll need help getting back on her feet. Maybe the church ladies can find her work in town, a place to stay. Ronan nodded, but something sat uneasy in his chest. The church ladies would help. They were good women. But they'd also smother her with questions and pity, and something about Mara Vance told him she'd hate both. After the doctor left, Ronan stood in the doorway of the guest room, watching the unconscious woman breathe. Even in sleep, there was something defiant about her, the set of her jaw, the way her hand curled into a loose fist on top of the quilt. Anywhere but where I was, she'd said. Ronan understood that. He'd spent 12 years making sure his past couldn't follow him into his future, building walls so high that nothing could climb over them. But looking at this stranger who'd refused to break even when the river tried to claim her, Ronan felt something he hadn't felt in over a decade. Curiosity. Who was Mara Vance? What was she running from? And why did the thought of her leaving after she recovered make his carefully ordered world feel suddenly, strangely insufficient? He didn't have answers. Didn't want them, he told himself firmly. But he didn't leave the doorway for a long time. A sec. Mara woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee. For a disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory crashed back, the river, the current, strong arms around her, and a voice telling her to hold on. She sat up too quickly and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through her ribs and her head spun. Easy. A woman's voice, kind but firm. An older woman with graying hair and warm eyes appeared beside the bed, carrying a tray. You took quite a beating from that river, young lady. Don't go rushing things. Where am I? Hale Ranch. Mr. Ronan brought you here after pulling you from the water. I'm Mrs. Chen. I keep house for him. How are you feeling? Mara assessed herself honestly. Sore everywhere, throat raw, ribs aching with each breath, but alive. Definitely alive. Like I fought a river and lost. Mrs. Chen smiled. The river didn't win, though, did it? You're here. That's what matters. Now I've brought you breakfast, nothing heavy, just toast and eggs. You need to eat to get your strength back. The food smelled incredible. Mara realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. Before the river, certainly. Maybe the day before that? Where is he? Mr. Hale? Out working, where he always is. Mrs. Chen set the tray across Mara's lap. That man works harder than any 3 people combined. Up before dawn, doesn't stop until dark. But he made me promise to tell him when you woke up, so I'll send word to the foreman. That's not necessary. I don't want to interrupt his work. He asked, Mrs. Chen said simply, as if that settled everything. Mara ate slowly, each swallow a reminder of what her body had been through. While she ate, Mrs. Chen bustled around the room, straightening things that didn't need straightening, clearly giving Mara space while keeping her company. You're not from Wyoming, Mrs. Chen observed. No, Colorado originally. Long way to travel alone. Mara heard the unspoken question. She chose her words carefully. Sometimes you need distance from the past to figure out the future. Mrs. Chen nodded, asking nothing more. Mara appreciated that. A knock at the door interrupted them. Tom Brennan stood in the hallway, hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable with being inside the main house. Begging your pardon, ma'am, Mrs. Chen. Boss said to tell him when the lady woke up. She's awake and fed, Mrs. Chen confirmed. Tell Mr. Hale she's doing well. Actually, Mara said, surprising herself, tell him I'd like to speak with him, when he has time. Tom looked even more uncomfortable. He don't usually, he's not much for... I just want to thank him, Mara said firmly, for saving my life. Surely he can spare 5 minutes for that. Yes, ma'am. I'll tell him. After Tom left, Mrs. Chen helped Mara wash and change into a clean dress, one that must have belonged to someone else, because it certainly wasn't Mara's style, but it fit well enough. Whose dress is this? Mara asked. Used to belong to Mr. Ronan's mother, Mrs. Chen said quietly. Been in storage for years. He told me to give you whatever you needed. Your own things were lost in the river, I understand. Mara ran her hand over the fabric. It was well made, quality material. The mother had good taste. What happened to her? Died when Mr. Ronan was barely more than a boy. Winter storm along with his father. Terrible thing. Mrs. Chen's expression was distant, sad. Changed him, from what folks say. Though I didn't know him before, so I can't rightly compare. It explained things. The empty house, the man who let no one in. Grief was a wall Mara understood all too well. She was standing by the window looking out at the vast expanse of Hale Ranch when the door opened again. Ronan Hale stood in the doorway, still dusty from work, holding his hat. In daylight, without the river's chaos between them, Mara could see him clearly. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of physical labor, dark hair, dark eyes, a face that would have been handsome if it wasn't so carefully blank. He stood like a man ready for a fight or flight, every muscle held in controlled tension. "Mrs. Vance," he said. His voice was deep, quiet, the voice of a man who didn't waste words. "You wanted to see me?" "I wanted to thank you," Mara replied, turning from the window. "For pulling me out of that river. You risked your life. You would have died otherwise." "Yes, that's why I'm thanking you." They looked at each other across the room. Mara had the strange sensation of being assessed, measured, categorized. She returned the favor, studying him just as intently. "What will you do now?" Ronan asked. "Doc Miller said your wagon was destroyed. Do you have resources? A place to go?" Mara could have lied. Pride suggested she should, but something about the directness of his question demanded an equally direct answer. "No, everything I owned was in that wagon. I have nothing except what I'm wearing and whatever you've already spent on the doctor." "I'll cover the doctor." "I don't want charity." "It's not charity. You wouldn't have needed a doctor if I'd posted warning signs at the crossing. I knew the river was dangerous." "I'm an adult who made a stupid decision," Mara countered. "That's not your responsibility." Ronan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, that same almost amusement she'd seen on the rock. "You always this stubborn? You always this determined to claim blame that isn't yours?" A pause. Then, incredibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "The church ladies in town can help you find work," he said. "A place to stay. They're good at that sort of thing." "I'm sure they are." Another pause, longer this time. Mara watched him think, watched him wrestle with something internal. When he spoke again, the words seemed to cost him effort. "Or I could use help here. Mrs. Chen comes 3 days a week, but the house needs more than that. Daily cooking, cleaning, managing supplies. It's work. Pays fair. There's a room off the kitchen you could use." Mara's heart kicked against her ribs, the ones that didn't ache. "You're offering me a job? If you want it. Why?" The question seemed to surprise him. "You need work. I need help." Seemed straightforward. But it wasn't, and they both knew it. Ronan Hale didn't let people into his space, into his life. Everyone in 3 territories knew that. Yet here he stood, offering her not just work, but a place to live under his own roof. Mara should have been suspicious, should have questioned his motives, worried about his intentions. Instead, she heard herself say, "I'm not a charity case. If I take this job, I'll work harder than anyone you've ever employed. I'll earn every cent you pay me." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Ronan replied, "based on what I saw in that river. And if I don't like it here, I leave. No strings, no obligations." "Agreed." Mara extended her hand. "Then I accept." Ronan looked at her outstretched hand for a long moment, as if he'd forgotten what the gesture meant. Then slowly, carefully, he reached out and shook it. His hand was calloused, strong, and warm. The handshake was brief, professional. But something passed between them in that moment. An understanding, perhaps, or recognition. 2 people who'd built walls around themselves, agreeing to exist in proximity without threatening each other's defenses. "You should rest another day," Ronan said, releasing her hand and stepping back. "Mrs. Chen can show you around tomorrow, explain what needs doing. Start the day after that." "I can start tomorrow." "You can barely stand without swaying," he pointed out, not unkindly. "Rest. That's not charity, that's common sense." Before Mara could argue, he was gone, pulling the door closed behind him with a soft click. Mrs. Chen appeared moments later, smiling knowingly. "Well now, that's something." "What is?" "Mr. Ronan offering you work, a room. In 6 years, I've never seen him let anyone get this close to his personal space. She began gathering the breakfast dishes. You must have made quite an impression. I nearly drowned in his river. That's not impressive. That's unfortunate. Mrs. Chen didn't argue, but her smile suggested she knew something Mara didn't. Later that night, alone in the guest room that would become hers, Mara stood at the window again. In the distance, she could see light in one of the barn structures. Even at this hour, Ronan Hale was working. She thought about Colorado, about the life she'd left behind, about Marcus, who'd promised her everything and delivered nothing but pain and debt, about the moment she'd decided that anything, even heading into unknown territory with no plan and no resources, was better than staying one more day in a place that had tried to break her. The river had almost finished what Marcus had started, but she was still here, still breathing, still moving forward, and now she had something she hadn't had in months, a chance, a real chance to rebuild, to start over. She wouldn't waste it. Ronan Hale had offered her an opportunity, even if he didn't fully understand why he'd done it. Mara would take that opportunity and prove, to him, to the town, to herself, that she was worth more than the broken pieces her past had tried to reduce her to. The light in the distant barn finally went out. Mara watched the darkness settle over the ranch and made herself a promise. She would not just survive here, she would thrive. And maybe, just maybe, she'd figure out what made a man build walls so high that even kindness struggled to climb over them. The frontier had taught Ronan Hale that isolation was safety. Mara Vance was about to teach him that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is refuse to live at all. But first, she had to convince him she was worth the risk. And based on the way he'd looked at her, really looked at her, like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve, that might be easier than either of them expected. Or it might be impossible. Time would tell. The ranch settled into silence. In separate rooms, two people who specialized in solitude lay awake, both wondering what they'd just agreed to. Neither could have predicted what was coming. Neither could have imagined how thoroughly they would remake each other. But the frontier had a way of surprising even its most careful survivors. And Ronan Hale, for all his planning and control, was about to discover that some storms couldn't be weathered alone. Mara's first full day at the Hale ranch began before sunrise. She woke to the sound of boots on the porch, the distant lowing of cattle, and the creak of the barn doors opening. Through her window, she could see Ronan crossing the yard toward the stables, his silhouette dark against the slowly brightening sky. He moved with purpose, each step deliberate, a man who'd walked this same path so many times his body knew it by memory alone. She dressed quickly in another of his mother's old dresses, this one a simple gray cotton that Mrs. Chen had altered to fit better, and made her way to the kitchen. If she was going to work here, she'd start on her own terms, not waiting to be told what to do. The kitchen was large and surprisingly well equipped, though it had the air of a space underutilized. Pots and pans hung from hooks, barely touched. A cast-iron stove dominated one wall, cold and waiting. Supplies lined the shelves in military precision: flour, sugar, coffee, beans, salt pork. Everything organized, nothing wasted. It was exactly what she'd expected from a man like Ronan Hale. Mara got the stove going and started coffee. By the time the water was boiling, she'd found eggs, bacon, and bread. She worked efficiently, years of cooking for herself, and before everything fell apart. For Marcus teaching her to move quickly and waste nothing. She was plating the food when the kitchen door opened. Ronan stopped short, clearly not expecting to find her there, much less to find breakfast waiting. "You should be resting," he said, though his eyes went to the food with unmistakable interest. "I rested yesterday. Today I work." Mara set the plate on the table. "Sit. Eat, unless you've already had breakfast." "I don't usually—" He paused. "Mrs. Chen doesn't come until Wednesday. So you just don't eat breakfast 3 days a week?" "Coffee's enough." Mara gave him a look that would have made a lesser man squirm. "Sit down, Mr. Hale." For a moment, she thought he'd refuse on principle. Then, surprisingly, he sat, picked up the fork, started eating with the focused attention of a man who hadn't realized how hungry he was. Mara poured coffee for them both and sat across from him, sipping her own while he ate. The silence should have been awkward, two strangers sharing a meal in the half-light of dawn, but somehow it wasn't. It felt almost natural. "You cook well," Ronan said eventually, his plate nearly clean. "I do a lot of things well," Mara replied. "Cooking's just one of them." He looked up at that, something sharp and assessing in his gaze. "That's so. I can keep books, manage inventory, handle correspondence. I can mend fence, tend a garden, treat minor injuries. I can shoot straight, ride decent enough, and I don't scare easy." She met his eyes steadily. "You offered me housekeeping work, and I'll do it better than you've ever seen it done. But if you need more, I can do that too." Ronan set down his fork, studying her with that same intensity she'd felt during their handshake. "Where'd you learn all that?" "Life," Mara said simply. "Same place you learned to build all this." A flash of understanding crossed his face, there and gone in an instant. He stood, picking up his hat from where he'd set it on the counter. "Tom Brennan's my foreman. He'll be bringing the daily counts around noon. I usually check them over lunch. If you can handle correspondence, there's a stack of letters on the desk in my office that need answering. Supply orders, mostly. A few from buyers interested in the spring calves." Mara's pulse quickened. He was testing her, seeing if her words matched her abilities. "I'll take care of it. But don't make promises you can't keep," Ronan said. But there was no heat in it, just fact. "I don't." He looked at her for another long moment, then nodded once and headed for the door, paused with his hand on the frame. "Thank you, for breakfast." Then he was gone, leaving Mara alone in the kitchen with the distinct impression that she'd just passed some kind of test she hadn't known she was taking. The ranch office was small but organized with the same ruthless efficiency as everything else Ronan touched. A heavy oak desk dominated the space, covered with neat stacks of papers, ledgers, and the promised correspondence. Mara settled into the chair, still warm from where he must have been sitting earlier, and began sorting through the letters. Most were routine. Supply orders from the general store in Red Hollow, inquiries about purchasing cattle or horses, a surveyor's report on the northern boundary markers. She worked through them methodically, her handwriting neat and professional as she drafted responses in Ronan's name. One letter made her pause. It was from a bank in Cheyenne, marked urgent. The language was carefully professional, but the message was clear. They were calling in a loan, a significant loan. The deadline was 6 weeks away. Mara sat back thinking, the ranch was clearly profitable. She'd seen the quality of the livestock, the excellent condition of the buildings and equipment. But land this size, this well-developed, required constant investment. And 6 weeks wasn't much time to liquidate assets or arrange alternative financing. She drafted a response requesting an extension and outlining Ronan's assets, then set it aside separately from the others. He'd need to review this one personally before it went out. By the time Tom Brennan arrived with the daily counts, Mara had worked through the entire pile of correspondence and was reviewing the ranch's supply ledgers. "Mrs. Vance," Tom said, surprised to find her in the office. "I was looking for the boss. He's out checking the north pasture. I can take those if you'd like." Tom hesitated, clearly uncertain about handing over ranch business to a woman he'd just met 3 days ago. "I'm not going to steal the cattle count, Mr. Brennan," Mara said dryly, "and Mr. Hale asked me to help with the paperwork." Still uncertain, Tom handed over the papers. "We're down 3 head in the east section. Think it might be that mountain lion that's been prowling around. Lost one of the calves, too." Mara made notes as he spoke, her mind already working through solutions. "Has anyone tracked it? Found its territory?" "Not yet. Boss doesn't want to spare the men when we're this close to moving the herds." "What if I did it?" Tom blinked. "Ma'am?" "Track the lion. I told Mr. Hale I could shoot. I can also track. If someone can spare a horse and a rifle, I can find where it's denning and either scare it off or deal with it." "That's dangerous work." "So is losing cattle to a predator you're not actively hunting." Mara stood, gathering the papers. "Talk to Mr. Hale about it. In the meantime, I'll note the losses in the daily log." Tom left looking bemused, and Mara returned to her work. She was deep in the supply ledgers, making notes about bulk purchasing opportunities that could save significant money, when Ronan returned just after noon. He stopped in the doorway of the office, taking in the organized papers, the completed correspondence, the neat notations in the ledger. "You've been busy." "I told you I could handle it." Mara stood, gesturing to the desk. "All the correspondence is drafted and ready for your signature except this one." She handed him the bank letter. "This needs your personal attention. The numbers I included are based on your current inventory and assets, but you'll want to verify them before we send it. Ronan read through the letter, his expression darkening. How did you know what figures to include? Your ledgers are thorough. I did the math. She paused. The bank's being aggressive with the timeline. Do you have history with them? They financed the initial land purchase when I bought the neighboring property 5 years ago. Been paying it down steady. He set the letter aside, jaw tight. Didn't expect them to call it early. Banks get nervous when they see opportunity elsewhere. Probably found a development project that promises faster returns. Mara leaned against the desk. But your ranch is solid collateral. If they won't extend, other banks will refinance. You're not at risk. You sound very certain of that. I am. I've seen the numbers. She didn't mention that she'd also seen what happened when banks weren't certain, when they smelled weakness and circled like vultures. Marcus had taught her that lesson thoroughly. Your operation is sound, Mr. Hale. You just need to make sure they know it. Ronan looked at her with something between surprise and wariness. You've done this before, dealt with banks, financing. In another life, Mara said carefully. One I'm not living anymore. He didn't push, though she could see the questions in his eyes. Instead, he turned to the other correspondence, reading through each letter she'd drafted. Occasionally he made a small correction, but mostly he just nodded, signed, and moved to the next one. These are good, he said finally. Better than what I usually write, more diplomatic. You're too blunt, Mara observed. These people are trying to do business with you. A little courtesy goes a long way. Courtesy wastes time. Efficiency that creates enemies wastes more time in the long run. Ronan's mouth did that almost twitch thing again. You always have an answer? Usually, it's a gift and a curse. This time he actually smiled. Just a little, just for a second, but it transformed his entire face, made him look younger, less burdened, human. Then it was gone, and he was all business again. Tom said you offered to track the mountain lion. I did. Why? Because it's killing your cattle, and no one else has time to deal with it properly. It's dangerous work. So you keep telling me. Mara crossed her arms. I'm not delicate, Mr. Hale. I can handle a rifle and I can track. Let me help. They stared at each other, wills locked. Mara refused to back down, and slowly, so slowly she almost missed it, Ronan's posture shifted. Not quite acceptance, but consideration. You'll take one of the men with you, he said finally. Jimmy's got good eyes and a steady hand. He can back you up. Fine. And you'll be back before dark. Obviously. And if you find the lion, you don't engage unless you have a clean shot. No heroics. I don't do heroics, Mr. Hale. I do practical solutions. Mara moved toward the door. I'll leave after lunch. Where's the last place you lost cattle? He told her, still looking like he wasn't sure this was a good idea, but unable to articulate exactly why. Mara understood. She was disrupting the careful order of his world, pushing into spaces he'd kept empty for years. Good. Order was safe, but it was also stagnant. The ranch needed fresh thinking, and whether Ronan Hale knew it or not, so did he. That afternoon, Mara and young Jimmy Carson rode out to the east section with rifles, rope, and determination. Jimmy was nervous, clearly uncomfortable with a woman leading a hunt, but he followed her instructions without complaint. Mara found the kill site easily. The calf had been taken down near a creek, dragged into the brush. The tracks were clear, a large male lion, probably territorial, definitely confident. He's not afraid of the cattle, she observed, studying the prints. Which means he's either old and can't hunt wild game as easily, or he's just figured out that ranch cattle are easier targets. How do we find him? Jimmy asked. We follow the pattern. Mara swung back into her saddle. Predators are creatures of habit. He'll have a den somewhere within range of his hunting ground. Water source nearby, good vantage point, shelter. We look for the right terrain, we'll find him. They spent 3 hours working in widening circles from the kill site. Jimmy, to his credit, stopped being nervous and started being impressed around the time Mara found the second set of tracks leading toward a rocky outcropping near the northern ridge. There, she said, pointing. See how the land rises? Good sight lines, plenty of rock for shelter. If I were a lion, that's where I'd den. They approached carefully, rifles ready. The den was exactly where Mara predicted. A deep cave in the outcropping, partially hidden by brush. Fresh tracks led inside. "He's home," Jimmy whispered. "Good." Mara dismounted, keeping her rifle trained on the cave entrance. "I'm going to make enough noise to encourage him to leave. When he comes out, we fire warning shots. Lions usually spook at gunfire if they're not cornered. He'll find new territory. And if he doesn't spook, then I shoot him, and we're done." Mara's voice was matter-of-fact. "But let's try the easy way first." She fired 3 shots into the air, the sound echoing off the rocks. For a moment, nothing. Then a low growl from inside the cave, growing louder. The mountain lion emerged, massive, scarred, definitely old. He bared his teeth, tail lashing, but he was sizing them up rather than charging, evaluating the threat. "Now," Mara said quietly, and they both fired warning shots into the ground in front of the cave. The lion roared, more anger than fear, took a step forward. Mara lowered her rifle, aiming center mass. Her hands were steady, her breathing even. "Last chance," she told the lion. "Your move." For a long, tense moment, the world held its breath. Then the lion turned and melted into the rocks, disappearing in the direction of the deeper wilderness, away from the ranch, away from the easy prey. Jimmy let out a breath he'd been holding. "You actually did it." "I told you I could." Mara lowered her rifle, watching until she was certain the lion was truly gone. "He won't be back. Too many easier hunting grounds in the high country. He just needed encouragement to remember that." They rode back to the ranch in the golden light of late afternoon. When they arrived, Tom and several other hands were gathered near the barn. Word had spread, as it always did. "Well?" Tom asked. "Lions relocated," Mara reported, dismounting. "Won't be bothering the cattle anymore." "You kill it?" "Didn't need to. Just reminded it that there are better places to hunt." Tom looked at Jimmy, who nodded confirmation. The men exchanged glances, impressed, surprised, and something else. Respect, maybe. "I'll be damned," one of them muttered. Ronan emerged from the barn, clearly having heard the commotion. His eyes went to Mara, taking in the rifle, the dust on her clothes, the calm confidence in her stance. "It's handled," she told him simply. "So I hear." He turned to Jimmy. "You saw it yourself?" "Yes, sir. She tracked it to the den, scared it off clean. Never seen anything like it." Something shifted in Ronan's expression, a recalculation happening behind those dark eyes. He'd tested her competence with the correspondence. Now he was seeing proof that her skills extended far beyond paperwork. "Good work," he said finally. "Both of you." It was a small acknowledgement, but from Ronan Hale, it felt significant. That evening, Mara cooked dinner, not just for herself, but for the men in the bunkhouse, too. Mrs. Chen had left supplies, but Mara went beyond simple fare. She made a stew rich with beef and vegetables, fresh bread, and a dried apple pie that made the ranch hands look at her like she'd performed magic. "Ma'am, this is incredible," Tom said, his third bowl of stew proving his sincerity. "It's just food," Mara replied, but she was pleased. In Colorado, cooking had been one of the few things that gave her control when everything else was falling apart. Here, it felt like building something instead of just surviving. Ronan ate in the main house, but she'd made sure to leave a plate for him. When she went to collect it later, she found it empty and washed, sitting neatly by the sink. A small gesture, but it felt like communication from a man who didn't know how to speak the things that mattered. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Mara rose before dawn, started coffee, made breakfast. Ronan would appear like clockwork, eat in his usual focused silence, then disappear into the work that consumed him. She'd spend mornings handling correspondence, managing supplies, and keeping the house in order. Afternoons varied. Sometimes she'd help Mrs. Chen with preserving or cleaning. Sometimes she'd ride out to check on various ranch operations. Sometimes she'd work in the office on the accounts. The ranch ledgers fascinated her. She could see the story of Ronan's 12 years written in numbers and notations. The lean early years when every penny went back into building. The gradual growth, the smart investments, the careful expansion. And underneath it all, the bone-deep determination of a man who refused to fail. But she also saw the gaps. Opportunities missed because he was stretched too thin. Bulk purchases that could have saved money if someone had time to negotiate them properly. Small inefficiencies that added up over months and years. Mara started making changes. Quietly at first, not wanting to overstep. She renegotiated the feed contract with the supplier in Red Hollow, saving 15% by committing to a year-long agreement instead of monthly orders. She reorganized the inventory system so they could track supplies more accurately and avoid both waste and emergency purchases. She found a buyer in Cheyenne willing to pay premium prices for their best horses if they could guarantee delivery schedules. Each change improved the ranch's efficiency. Each improvement caught Ronan's attention. "You reorganized the storage barn," he said one evening, finding her in the office reviewing the month's accounts. "The old system was creating waste. We were buying supplies we already had because no one could find them efficiently." "I could find them." "You could," Mara agreed, "but you're one person. This way, anyone can find what they need without pulling you away from more important work." Ronan was quiet for a moment. "You're changing things. I'm improving things. There's a difference." "Is there?" He moved into the office, his presence seeming to fill the small space. "You've been here 3 weeks. Already you've restructured half of how this ranch operates." Mara heard the unspoken question. Was he angry about it? She stood, facing him directly. "Are the changes making things worse or better?" "Better," he admitted grudgingly. But you don't like change because change means risk, and risk means potential loss." Mara's voice was gentle but firm. "I understand that, Mr. Hale. I do. But sometimes not changing is the bigger risk. Your ranch is successful, but it could be more. You're carrying weight that could be distributed. You're working twice as hard as necessary because you won't trust anyone to help properly." "I trust my men." "With labor, yes, but not with decisions. Not with the things that actually matter." She gestured to the ledgers. "These books tell me you haven't taken a full day off in 6 years. You work every single day, dawn to dark, managing everything personally. That's not strength, Mr. Hale. That's fear dressed up as dedication." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and true. Ronan's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about fear." "Don't I?" Mara moved closer, her eyes meeting his without flinching. "I know what it's like to lose everything. I know what it's like to be so terrified of failing that you'd rather work yourself to death than risk depending on anyone. I know what it's like to build walls so high you forget there's supposed to be a door. You don't know me. I know what I see. And I see a man who's so busy surviving that he's forgotten how to live." For a moment, she thought she'd pushed too far. Ronan's expression went dangerous, the kind of look that made brave men reconsider their choices. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It was a harsh sound, bitter and surprised, but it was real. "You've got nerve," he said. "I'll give you that." "I've got perspective," Mara corrected. "And I'm not afraid of you, Mr. Hale. I've seen worse than a rancher with control issues." "Have you?" It wasn't quite a question, more like a challenge. Mara considered how much to reveal, how much truth this moment could handle. "I was married once," she said finally, "to a man who promised me security and delivered debt and violence instead. He gambled away everything we had, then borrowed against everything I had. When I tried to leave, he made it clear that wasn't an option, so I made it an option anyway." Ronan went very still. "How?" "I waited until he was gone on one of his business trips, which was actually 3 days of poker and whiskey in Denver, sold everything that wasn't nailed down, paid off the most dangerous debts, and left. Bought that wagon with the last of the money. Started heading west with no plan except anywhere but there. The river was the universe's way of testing whether I really wanted a fresh start or just wanted to run." Mara smiled without humor. "Turns out I wanted both, and I got them." Ronan studied her with new understanding in his eyes. "Your husband, he tried to follow you?" "He might have, if he'd known which direction I went, but I covered my tracks pretty well. And Marcus isn't the type to chase after something that doesn't want to be caught. He'll just find another woman to trap with pretty words and empty promises." The bitterness in her voice must have been clear because Ronan's expression softened fractionally. "I'm sorry. Don't be. I survived. More than that, I learned." Mara returned to the desk, her hands steady on the ledger. "I learned that you can't build anything real on fear. Not a marriage, not a life, not a future. Fear makes you small, makes you mean, makes you miss the things that actually matter. And I promised myself I'd never live like that again. So you came here and started rearranging my entire operation. I came here and started helping you build something better than just survival. She looked up at him. If you'll let me. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and risk. Finally, Ronan said, "The bank letter. You were right about the refinancing. I got offers from 2 other banks in Cheyenne. Better terms than the original loan." Good. They specifically mentioned the quality of the documentation and financial projections, said they were impressed by the professionalism of the application. Mara felt something warm bloom in her chest. "You're welcome. I didn't say thank you. You just did, in your way." That almost smile again, there and gone like lightning. "You're going to be trouble, aren't you?" "Probably," Mara admitted. "But useful trouble. The kind that makes things better instead of worse." "We'll see." But he didn't sound doubtful anymore. He sounded curious, maybe even hopeful. That night, for the first time since Mara arrived, Ronan stayed in the kitchen after dinner. He didn't help with the dishes. That would have been too much, too fast. But he sat at the table with his coffee and talked. About the ranch, about the upcoming cattle drive, about the challenges of the season. Mara listened and responded, offering suggestions when they seemed welcome, staying quiet when silence felt right. It was the longest conversation they'd had, and it felt like crossing some invisible boundary neither of them had acknowledged existed. When Ronan finally stood to leave, he paused at the door. "That thing you said, about walls and doors." "Yes? Maybe." He struggled with the words, clearly unused to this kind of vulnerability. "Maybe you're right. About some of it." Then he was gone before Mara could respond, but she smiled into the darkness, washing the last of the dishes, feeling something shift in the foundation of this strange new life she was building. Ronan Hale was beginning to trust her. Not completely. That would take time, maybe more time than either of them had, but enough to let her in. Enough to consider that his walls might have cracks that needed filling rather than fortifying. It was a start. And in Mara's experience, starts were the most dangerous and most beautiful thing in the world. Because once something started, it had to go somewhere, had to become something, had to either grow into something real or collapse under the weight of what it couldn't be. She just hoped they were both brave enough to find out which. The changes came gradually, like spring thaw, so slow you couldn't see them happening until suddenly the ice was gone and the river was flowing again. Ronan started staying longer at breakfast, not talking much. He'd never be a talker, but present in a way he hadn't been before. He'd ask Mara's opinion on suppliers, on scheduling, on the 100 small decisions that went into running a ranch this size. At first, his questions felt like tests, but as the weeks passed, they became something else. Collaboration, maybe. Or trust. The men noticed. "Boss actually smiled yesterday," Tom told Mara one afternoon when she brought water out to the crew repairing the south fence. "Real smile, not that half thing he does. Haven't seen that since, hell, maybe never." "What prompted it?" Mara asked, though she suspected she knew. "You'd reorganized the tool shed. He went looking for wire cutters, found them right where the label said they'd be. Stood there for a minute like he couldn't believe it, then just smiled." Tom shook his head. "Small thing, I know, but with him, small things matter." They did matter. Mara was learning that Ronan communicated in gestures rather than words. A nod of approval when she negotiated a better price on lumber. An extra portion of stew appearing on her plate at dinner, served by his hand before she could protest. The way he'd started checking with her before making major purchases. Not because he needed permission, but because he valued her input. It was progress. Real, tangible progress. But it was also dangerous, because somewhere in those small gestures and quiet mornings, Mara had started feeling things she absolutely could not afford to feel. She noticed the way Ronan's hands moved when he worked with the horses, firm but gentle, commanding respect without force. She noticed how he'd push his hair back when he was frustrated, leaving it slightly messy in a way that made him look younger, less guarded. She noticed that when he was truly thinking, really wrestling with a problem, he'd get a small crease between his eyebrows that she wanted to smooth away with her thumb. These were not professional observations. These were the thoughts of a woman who was dangerously close to forgetting why she'd sworn off men entirely. Mara tried to ignore it, threw herself into work with even more intensity, as if productivity could somehow insulate her from inconvenient emotions. She expanded the garden, started a proper chicken coop, reorganized the entire supply chain for the ranch's dry goods. She worked until she was too tired to think, too exhausted to feel. It didn't help. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in late June. Ronan had been working with a new stallion all morning, a magnificent black beast with a temperament that matched Ronan's own stubbornness. The horse had been sold to him as difficult but trainable, which in rancher terms meant nearly impossible and possibly homicidal. Mara watched from the kitchen window as Ronan worked in the corral. He moved with infinite patience, never forcing, never rushing, just persistent, steady pressure and release, teaching the horse that cooperation brought relief, that trust brought reward. It was mesmerizing and terrifying because she could see herself in that horse, wild, defensive, convinced that accepting help meant accepting control. And she could see what Ronan was trying to teach it, that surrender wasn't weakness, that trust was a choice, not a trap. She was so focused on watching that she didn't notice Mrs. Chen come up beside her until the older woman spoke. "He's good with broken things," Mrs. Chen observed quietly. Mara started. "The horse isn't broken, just untrained." "I wasn't talking about the horse." Their eyes met, and Mara felt exposed in a way she hadn't since arriving. Mrs. Chen's expression was kind but knowing. "I don't know what you mean," Mara said, but even she could hear how unconvincing it sounded. "Child, I've been watching you two dance around each other for 6 weeks now. You think I don't see what's happening?" "Nothing's happening. I work here, that's all." "Mm-hmm." Mrs. Chen began kneading bread dough with practiced efficiency. "And I suppose that's why you cook his favorite meals without him having to ask. Why you sort his correspondence in the exact order he prefers. Why you watch him work with that look on your face like you're seeing something the rest of us can't." Mara's cheeks burned. "I'm just doing my job well." "You're doing much more than that, and you know it." Mrs. Chen's voice was gentle. "Question is, does he know it? And more importantly, what are you going to do about it?" "Nothing," Mara said firmly. "I'm going to do nothing, because getting involved with my employer would be spectacularly stupid, and I've already used up my lifetime quota of stupid decisions on my ex-husband. Mr. Ronan's nothing like what you've described of that Marcus fellow." "I know that." And she did. Ronan was everything Marcus hadn't been. Steady, honest, capable of keeping his word. But that almost made it worse because it meant the risk was real. If she let herself care and it fell apart, it wouldn't be because she'd made a bad choice. It would be because she simply wasn't enough. That was a different kind of scary entirely. Mrs. Chen seemed to read her thoughts. "Fear's a useful thing when it keeps you from real danger. But when it keeps you from real life, that's when it becomes the enemy." Before Mara could respond, a commotion erupted from the corral. The stallion had reared, and Ronan, who'd been too close, went down hard. The horse's hooves came down inches from his head as he rolled away, but not fast enough. One caught his shoulder with a sickening crack. Mara was moving before she consciously decided to move. Out the door, across the yard, climbing the corral fence while Tom and the other men were still processing what had happened. "Stay back," Ronan shouted, but she ignored him. The stallion was circling, agitated and dangerous. But Mara had grown up around horses before everything went wrong in Colorado. She knew how to read them, how to move. She positioned herself between Ronan and the horse, arms out, voice low and steady. "Easy now, easy. Nobody's going to hurt you." The stallion snorted, tossing his head, but he didn't charge. Mara took a slow step forward, then another, giving the horse space to retreat if he wanted, showing him the way out of the confrontation without backing him into a corner. "Get out of the corral, Mara," Ronan said through gritted teeth. He was on his feet now, cradling his left arm. "In a minute." She kept her focus on the horse, kept moving slowly, steadily, until the stallion made his choice. He turned and trotted to the far side of the corral, tension leaving his body. Only then did Mara turn to Ronan. His face was pale under the dust, his left arm hanging at an unnatural angle. "That's dislocated," she said, already moving to his side. "I know what it is. Can you walk, or do I need to get help?" "I can walk?" But he swayed as he said it, and Mara slipped under his good shoulder, taking some of his weight. Tom had the gate open, and they made it to the house with Ronan staying upright through sheer stubbornness. Mrs. Chen took one look and started boiling water, gathering clean cloths. "We need to send for Doc Miller," she said. "No." Ronan's voice was firm despite the pain. "Mara can handle it." Mara looked at him in surprise. "How do you know I can handle it?" "You said you could treat injuries. You weren't lying about anything else." The trust in that statement hit her like a physical thing. He was in pain, vulnerable, and he was choosing to rely on her. "Sit," she ordered, gesturing to a kitchen chair. "This is going to hurt." "Everything hurts already." She examined the shoulder carefully. Definitely dislocated, but no obvious fractures. She'd seen this injury before. Marcus had dislocated his shoulder in a bar fight once, and she'd been the one to set it because he'd refused to pay for a doctor. The memory made her hands shake for just a second. Then she pushed it away and focused on the present. On Ronan, who was watching her with those dark eyes, trusting her to help instead of harm. "On 3, she said, positioning herself. 1. She pulled on 2, the way you were supposed to, using the element of surprise to make the manipulation easier. The shoulder joint popped back into place with an audible click. Ronan made a sound that was half gasp, half curse, but he didn't pull away. "Bastard move," he managed when he could breathe again. "Effective move," Mara corrected. She was already wrapping his shoulder, immobilizing it the way she'd been taught. "You'll need to keep this still for at least a week. No heavy lifting, no horse training, no anything that puts strain on the joint." "I don't have time for that." "Make time. Unless you want permanent damage." They stared at each other. Another battle of wills. But this time Ronan looked away first. "Fine," he muttered. 1 week. "And you're going to let Tom handle the daily operations," Mara continued, pressing her advantage. "You're going to rest, like a normal person who just had a serious injury." "I'll rest when the work's done." "The work is never done on a ranch, and you know it." She finished the wrapping and stepped back. "You're not invincible, Mr. Hale, and trying to prove you are doesn't make you strong. It makes you reckless." "I don't recall asking for a lecture." "Too bad. You're getting one anyway." Mara's voice was sharp with fear she hadn't fully processed yet. "That horse could have killed you. You were too close, too confident, and you didn't have backup. What if you'd hit your head instead of your shoulder? What if you'd broken your neck? What then?" "Then I'd be dead, and it wouldn't matter." The casual way he said it made something crack inside Mara's chest. "It would matter to Tom and the men who depend on you, to Mrs. Chen, who's worked for you for years, to—" She stopped herself just in time. "To who?" Ronan asked quietly. "To anyone who isn't determined to watch you kill yourself through stubbornness." She turned away, busying herself with cleaning up the medical supplies. "You're going to rest. That's final." She heard him stand, felt him move closer. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, uncertain in a way she'd never heard from him. "You were scared." "Of course I was scared. I just watched you nearly get trampled." "No, you're still scared, right now." A pause. "Why?" "Because I'm starting to care about you," Mara wanted to say. "Because somewhere between the breakfast conversations and the quiet evenings, and the way you look at me like I'm a puzzle you actually want to solve, I forgot to keep my distance. Because you're everything I didn't know I needed, and I'm terrified of what that means." But she couldn't say any of that. So instead she said, "Because I've already watched one man destroy himself through his own bad choices. I don't particularly want to watch another." It was true, even if it wasn't the whole truth. Ronan was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'm not him. Your husband. I know that." "Do you?" He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him despite not touching. "Because sometimes you look at me like you're waiting for me to prove you wrong, like you're expecting me to become someone I'm not." Mara turned to face him. His shoulder was properly wrapped, his face still pale from pain, but his eyes were clear and direct, honest in a way that made her chest ache. "I don't expect that," she said quietly. "But I've learned not to trust what people show me at the beginning. Marcus was charming and kind until he wasn't. The warning signs were there. I just didn't want to see them." What warning signs do you see in me?" The question was a challenge and an invitation both. Mara considered lying, deflecting, but they'd come too far for dishonesty. "None," she admitted. which scares me more than if I did, because it means either you're genuinely different or you're better at hiding your faults than he was. I have plenty of faults, Ronan said. I'm stubborn, emotionally distant, terrible at asking for help. I work too much and trust too little. I've spent 12 years building walls so high I forgot what the view was like without them. He paused. But I don't lie. I don't cheat. And I don't hurt people who depend on me. That good enough? It should have been a simple answer, yes or no. But Mara's heart was racing, and she couldn't quite catch her breath, and the kitchen suddenly felt too small for the enormity of what was happening between them. Why does it matter, she asked, what I think of you? Because it does. Simple, direct, terrifying in its honesty. They stood there, inches apart, the air between them charged with everything they weren't saying. Mara could see the exact moment Ronan made his decision, saw it in the way his expression shifted, the way he swayed slightly toward her despite the pain in his shoulder. He was going to kiss her. She could see the intention forming, could feel her own body responding before her mind caught up. And that was when the fear won. Mara stepped back, creating distance, breaking whatever spell had been weaving itself around them. You need to rest. Doctor's orders. Ronan stopped, reading her retreat for what it was. Something shuddered in his expression, that careful blankness sliding back into place like armor. Right, he said. Rest. He turned and walked toward his room, each step measured and controlled. The door closed quietly behind him, not a slam, which somehow made it worse. Mara stood alone in the kitchen, shaking. Mrs. Chen appeared from wherever she'd tactfully disappeared to, her expression sympathetic but not surprised. You ran, the older woman observed. I protected myself. There's a difference between protection and prison, child. Mrs. Chen began cleaning up, giving Mara something to focus on besides the closed door and the opportunity she'd just rejected. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is risk getting hurt again. And sometimes the smartest thing you can do is learn from past mistakes. Is that what you're doing? Learning, or are you just hiding? Mara didn't have an answer for that. She helped Mrs. Chen clean up in silence, then escaped to the office where numbers and ledgers were safe, predictable things that couldn't break your heart. But the columns of figures blurred in front of her eyes, and all she could see was the look on Ronan's face in that moment before she'd stepped away. Not anger, not even disappointment. Understanding. Like he'd expected exactly this outcome. Like he'd known she would run and had asked the question anyway, just to confirm what he already believed about himself. That he wasn't worth the risk. The thought made her feel sick. The next few days were strained. Ronan stayed in his room more than usual, emerging only for meals and essential business. When he did appear, he was polite, professional, and utterly distant. All the progress they'd made over the past week seemed to evaporate overnight. Tom noticed. Boss is wound tighter than a spring. Something happened between you two? He's injured and frustrated about being forced to rest, Mara said, which was true, but not the truth. Uh-huh. Tom didn't look convinced. Well, whatever it is, you might want to fix it before he drives us all crazy with his mood. But Mara didn't know how to fix it. Didn't know if she even should. Maybe distance was better, safer. Maybe they'd both been fooling themselves thinking that proximity could become something more. On the fourth day of careful avoidance, Mara was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. She stood, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. 6 riders were coming up the main road to the ranch. They didn't look like visitors. They looked like trouble. Tom and several of the hands were already moving to intercept them, hands resting on their gun belts in a way that managed to be both casual and threatening. The lead rider pulled up short of the house. He was middle-aged, well-dressed, with the kind of face that had probably been handsome once before too much liquor and too many bad choices had carved lines into it. Mara's heart stopped. She knew that face. She'd loved that face once, before she'd learned to fear it. Marcus Vance, her husband, had found her after all. Well now, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the yard with that familiar charm that used to make her weak. Now it just made her cold. This is quite the setup you've landed in, Mara darling, much nicer than that shack we had in Colorado. Mara forced herself to walk forward, forced her voice to stay steady. What are you doing here, Marcus? Collecting what's mine. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. You didn't really think you could just walk away from our marriage, did you? Run off with half our money and disappear? Half my money, Mara corrected. That I earned, and you'd already gambled away everything else we had. Our money, Marcus insisted. As your husband, I have legal claim to anything you possess, including whatever wages you've been earning here. His eyes drifted to the ranch house, calculating. Nice place. Hale Ranch, if I'm not mistaken. Heard in town that old Ronan hired himself a housekeeper a few months back. Didn't realize it was my wife. Tom stepped forward. The lady said she doesn't want you here. I suggest you leave. The lady is my legal wife, Marcus said, his voice hardening, which means this is between me and her, unless Mr. Hale wants to be accused of harboring another man's wife without permission. The kitchen door opened. Ronan emerged, his shoulders still wrapped, but his presence commanding despite the injury. He took in the scene with one sweeping glance. Mara's pale face, Marcus's aggressive posture, the tension crackling through the air. There a problem here? Ronan asked, his voice deceptively mild. Marcus turned his smile on Ronan. No problem at all, Mr. Hale. Just here to collect my wife and settle her debts. What debts? The money she stole when she ran off, plus whatever she owes me for abandoning our marriage without permission. Marcus dismounted, moving toward Mara with casual confidence. Now, darling, let's not make this difficult. Get your things and we'll be on our way. I'm not going anywhere with you, Mara said, finding her voice. We're done, Marcus. I left for a reason. You left illegally. A wife can't just abandon her husband because she's having a mood. He reached for her arm, and Mara jerked back. Ronan moved faster than she'd have thought possible with an injured shoulder. He was between them in 2 strides, his good hand catching Marcus's wrist in a grip that made the other man wince. Don't touch her, Ronan said quietly. Or what? Marcus tried to pull free and couldn't. She's my wife. I have every legal right. You have the right to leave my property, Ronan interrupted. Right now, before I have my men escort you off at gunpoint. On what grounds? Trespassing. Threatening an employee, take your pick. Ronan released Marcus's wrist with a slight shove. Mrs. Vance works for me. She's under my protection, and you're not welcome here. Marcus's expression darkened. She's still legally married to me. That means nothing on my land. Ronan's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. You want to pursue a legal claim, get a lawyer, and file papers. But until then, you're not taking her anywhere she doesn't want to go. Clear? For a long moment, Marcus considered his options. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and facing a man who clearly wasn't intimidated by threats or legal posturing. Finally, he smiled that false, charming smile and stepped back. This isn't over, Mara. You're still my wife, and I will collect what's owed to me, one way or another. He mounted his horse, his men following suit. Before riding off, he turned back one last time. Enjoy your little sanctuary while it lasts, he said to Mara. Then to Ronan, I hope you know what you're protecting. That woman's got a talent for destruction. Just ask anyone in Colorado. Then they were gone, hoofbeats fading into the distance. The silence they left behind was deafening. Mara stood frozen, shaking with a combination of fear and rage and shame. Everyone was staring at her, Tom, the ranch hands, Mrs. Chen in the doorway. All of them now knew the truth she'd been trying to outrun. She was still married, still legally bound to a man who'd hurt her, used her, and now wanted to finish the job. Mara, Ronan started. Don't. She couldn't look at him, couldn't bear to see the judgment in his eyes. I need a minute. She walked away, not quite running, but close. Made it to her small room off the kitchen before the tears came. Tears of frustration more than sadness, anger more than fear. She'd been so stupid, thinking she could just leave and start over, thinking the past wouldn't follow, thinking she deserved a fresh start without having to pay for the mistakes that had led her to Marcus in the first place. A soft knock at the door. Mara, it's me. Ronan. Of course it was Ronan. Go away, she said. No. The door opened. He stepped inside, closing it behind him. We need to talk. There's nothing to talk about. You heard Marcus. I'm still legally married, which means I've been lying to you about my situation this whole time. You told me you left your husband. You never said you were divorced. I implied it. You survived it. There's a difference. Ronan moved closer, and Mara finally looked up at him. His expression wasn't judgmental. It was concerned. Maybe even angry, but not at her. He hurt you, Ronan said. It wasn't a question. Not the way you're thinking. He never hit me. But there are other ways to destroy someone. Mara wiped at her eyes, hating the weakness. He lied, manipulated, gambled away everything we had, made me feel like I was crazy for questioning him, stupid for not understanding his business ventures. And when I finally tried to leave, he made it clear that I belonged to him, that I didn't get to make that choice. So you ran. So I ran, Mara confirmed, because staying would have killed me. Maybe not physically, but in every way that mattered. Ronan was quiet for a moment. Then, he's not taking you back. He has legal right. I don't care about his legal rights. Ronan's voice was flat, absolute. He's not taking you anywhere you don't want to go, not while you're under my protection. Your protection won't mean anything if he gets the law involved. Then we'll get the law on our side. There are divorce lawyers in Cheyenne. We'll find one, file the papers properly, make sure he can't touch you. That costs money I don't have. I have money. Mara shook her head. I can't ask you to... Psst. You're not asking. I'm offering. Ronan crouched down so they were eye level, and the intensity in his gaze stole her breath. You worked for me for 3 months. In that time, you've improved this ranch's efficiency by 20%, saved me thousands in supply costs, and handled correspondence better than I ever could. You've earned every cent I'd pay a lawyer 10 times over. That's not the point. Then what is the point, Mara? His voice was gentle but frustrated. Because from where I'm sitting, a woman who escaped an abusive situation is being threatened by her abuser, and you're acting like you don't deserve help, like you're supposed to handle this alone. I am supposed to handle it alone. It's my problem. It's our problem now, Ronan said firmly. Because you work for me. Because you live on my property. Because I... He stopped himself, jaw tightening. Because what? Mara whispered. The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. Ronan looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, really seeing her. Not the competent housekeeper or the efficient manager, but the woman underneath all the armor. Because I can't watch someone destroy you when I have the power to stop it, he said finally. And because that bastard was right about one thing, this isn't over. He'll be back. And when he comes, you need to be legally free of him. Otherwise, he'll use every law, every technicality, every bit of leverage he can find to force you back under his control. Mara knew he was right. Marcus didn't give up when he thought he had a claim to something, and in his mind, she was property, something he'd invested in that hadn't paid proper returns. A divorce will take months, she said. Maybe longer, and the whole time he'll be out there planning his next move. Then we plan ours first. Ronan stood, offering her his good hand, starting with getting you a lawyer who's meaner than he is. Despite everything, Mara felt a small smile tug at her lips. You think there's a lawyer meaner than Marcus? I know there is. Sarah Coldwell, out of Cheyenne. She's a pit bull in a lady's dress. Handles divorces for women who need someone willing to fight dirty. We'll wire her tomorrow. Ronan, don't argue, he interrupted. For once in your stubborn life, just let someone help you. The words were so close to what Mrs. Chen had said that Mara felt something crack in her defenses. All the fear, all the pride, all the determination to handle everything alone. Suddenly it felt less like strength and more like the bars of a cage she'd built herself. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Ronan's expression softened. Okay? I'll let you help. I'll contact the lawyer, file the papers. Do this right instead of just running. Mara took a shaky breath. But I'm paying you back. Every cent of the legal fees. I don't care how long it takes. If it makes you feel better, fine, but it's not necessary. It's necessary to me. They looked at each other, and something shifted between them again. But this time, Mara didn't step back, didn't let fear make her choices. Instead, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Ronan in a hug that probably hurt his injured shoulder, but which he returned anyway, his good arm coming around her like a shield. Thank you, she said against his chest, for not judging me, for not making me leave. Why would I make you leave? His voice rumbled through her. You're the best thing that's happened to this ranch in years. Just the ranch? Mara wanted to ask. But she didn't. Some truths needed more time, more courage. For now, this was enough. Standing in his arms, feeling safe for the first time since Marcus had ridden onto the property. Knowing that whatever came next, she wouldn't have to face it completely alone. It was more than enough. It was everything. They stood there for longer than either would admit, and when Mara finally pulled away, she found Mrs. Chen in the kitchen doorway, wearing an expression that said she'd seen everything and approved completely. "That man's never going to just ride away," Mrs. Chen said quietly, after Ronan had left to give instructions to Tom about posting guards. "Men like him don't let go of things they think they own." "I know." Mara's hands were steadier now, but the fear hadn't completely left. "Which is why we need to move fast on the divorce, before he has time to build a legal strategy." The telegram went out to Sarah Coldwell that afternoon. The response came back within 3 hours, terse and professional. "We'll take case. Send all documentation. Retainer required. Wire transfer acceptable." Ronan paid the retainer without hesitation, brushing aside Mara's protests with a firmness that left no room for argument. "We'll settle accounts later. Right now, speed matters more than pride." He was right, and Mara knew it. But accepting his help felt like swallowing glass. Necessary, but painful in ways she couldn't fully articulate. Over the next week, Mara compiled everything Sarah Coldwell needed. Marriage certificate, documentation of Marcus's debts, witness statements from people in Colorado who'd seen his gambling, his violence toward property, if not people, his pattern of financial manipulation. It was humiliating, laying out the full scope of her failure to judge character, but Mara forced herself to be thorough. Meanwhile, Ronan posted guards, rotating shifts of his most trusted men, watching the roads for any sign of Marcus's return. The ranch took on the atmosphere of a fortress, tense and watchful. But Marcus didn't come back. Not that week, not the next. The silence was somehow worse than his presence, because it meant he was planning something. "He's going to hit where we're weakest," Mara told Ronan one evening as they reviewed the ranch accounts together. A routine they'd fallen into, working side by side in the office as the sun set. "Which is where?" Ronan asked, making a notation in the cattle ledger. "The law. He'll find some technicality, some legal angle that forces me back to Colorado under the marriage contract. Or he'll claim I stole from him, which he's already threatened, and get a warrant issued. Sarah says the theft claim won't hold up. You have proof the money was yours." "Proof on paper. But Marcus is charming when he wants to be. He'll find a judge who believes a sweet-talking husband over a runaway wife." Ronan set down his pen, giving her his full attention. "You think I'd let them take you?" "I think the law doesn't care what you'd let happen." "Then we'll make sure the law's on our side before he can move." Ronan's voice carried an edge of steel. "Sarah's already filed the initial papers. She says with the documentation we provided, she can push for an expedited hearing based on abandonment and financial abuse. Could have preliminary rulings within a month. A month is a long time. It's fast for the legal system. And in the meantime, you're here, safe." Safe. The word felt foreign, impossible. Mara had spent so long running, so long looking over her shoulder, that safety seemed like a luxury she hadn't earned. But when she looked at Ronan, at the determined set of his jaw, the absolute certainty in his eyes, she almost believed it might be real. The moment broke when Tom knocked on the office door, his expression troubled. "Boss, we got a problem in town. Jimmy just rode back, says there's talk." "What kind of talk?" Ronan asked, already standing. "About Mrs. Vance. About her being a married woman, living here without her husband." Tom shifted uncomfortably. "Some folks are saying it ain't proper, that it reflects poorly on you, on the ranch." Mara felt her stomach drop. Of course, she should have anticipated this. Small-town morality was its own kind of prison. "Who's saying this?" Ronan's voice was dangerously quiet. "Mostly the church ladies. But it's spreading, and—" Tom hesitated. "Mr. Vance has been in town, staying at the boarding house, talking to anyone who'll listen about how his poor wife was led astray, how she needs to come home." "Son of a—" Ronan cut himself off. "He's building public opinion against us." "Smart move," Mara said bitterly. "Make me the villain, make himself the wronged party. Then when he makes his legal move, the town's already on his side." "Not the whole town," Tom said. Doc Miller told him where to stick his sob story. And the general store owner, Mr. Winters, said he's seen too many men play the victim while being the real problem. But enough people are listening that it's becoming complicated. Complicated. That was one word for it. Mara could think of several others, none of them polite. I should leave, she said quietly. Go somewhere else. Somewhere he can't use my presence here to damage your reputation. No. Ronan's response was immediate and absolute. Ronan, be reasonable. If this damages the ranch's standing in the community, then the community can mind its own business. He moved to the window, looking out at the land he'd built with his own hands. I spent 12 years proving I didn't need anyone's approval to succeed. I'm not going to start caring about gossip now. This is different. This isn't just about you anymore. You're right. It's about you too. And I'm not throwing you to the wolves to satisfy a bunch of hypocrites who've probably got their own secrets buried deep. Tom cleared his throat. There might be another way. If Mrs. Vance was seen as an employee living in proper quarters, with a chaperone present, Mrs. Chen's here 3 days a week, Mara said. That's not exactly full-time chaperoning. No, but if she moved into the house... Tom trailed off, looking at Ronan. Boss, you got that extra room upstairs. If Mrs. Chen took it, stayed here permanent instead of going back to town each night, it'd be proper. 2 women in the household, employer in separate quarters. Nothing scandalous about that. Ronan considered this. Mrs. Chen would have to agree. And she's got her own place in town. Her place is a rented room above the general store, Tom pointed out. Tiny, drafty. I bet she'd jump at the chance for better accommodations if it meant more regular work. I'll ask her, Ronan decided, tonight. And Tom, spread the word that anyone who has a problem with Mrs. Vance's presence here can take it up with me directly. I want names. Boss, that might not be... I want names, Ronan repeated. If people are going to talk, they can do it to my face. After Tom left, Mara turned to Ronan. You can't intimidate the whole town into accepting this situation. Watch me. That's not how this works. You can't just bully people into seeing things your way. I'm not bullying. I'm establishing boundaries. Ronan faced her fully. You work for me. You're under my protection. Anyone who has a problem with that is implying I can't manage my own household properly, and I won't tolerate that implication. It's not about your household management. It's about propriety, social rules. Rules designed to control women and punish them for making choices men don't approve of. His voice was hard. I've watched this town crucify women for less. Sarah Miller was shunned for months just because she refused to marry the man her father chose. Catherine Webb lost half her business when she turned down a prominent rancher's proposal. This place talks about morality, but what they really mean is conformity. Mara stared at him. You've thought about this before. I've watched it happen. Stayed silent because it wasn't my business. Ronan's expression was troubled. But this is my business. You're my business. And I'm not staying silent anymore. The weight of those words settled between them. Your business. Not just an employee, not just someone under his protection. Something more. Something neither of them was quite ready to name. Mrs. Chen agreed to the living arrangement with barely a moment's hesitation. That room's been empty too long anyway, she said, already planning how she'd arrange her things. And it'll be nice having another woman in the house full time. Mr. Ronan's fine company, but he's not much for conversation. I heard that, Ronan called from the other room. You were meant to, Mrs. Chen shot back, smiling. To Mara, she said quietly, this is the right move, practically and otherwise. Otherwise? You'll see. The next few days were strange. Ronan became increasingly protective, almost possessive in his watchfulness. He insisted on knowing where Mara was at all times, assigned her an escort whenever she left the immediate ranch grounds, and made it clear to every hand on the property that her safety was their top priority. It should have felt suffocating. Instead, it felt like being valued. Marcus made his next move on a Wednesday. Sheriff Dalton rode up to the ranch just after noon, looking uncomfortable and apologetic. Mrs. Vance, I need to speak with you. Official business. Ronan materialized at Mara's side before the sheriff had finished speaking. What kind of official business? The kind where I'd appreciate privacy, Dalton said, though his tone was gentle. Ma'am, there's been a complaint filed. Your husband's claiming you stole a significant sum of money when you left Colorado. Says he's got witnesses, documentation. That money was mine, Mara said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Earned from my own work. I have proof. I'm sure you do, and I'm sure this will all get sorted in court. But in the meantime, Dalton looked genuinely pained. He's also filed for a writ of restitution. Says as your legal husband, he's entitled to your wages earned while you've been separated, including what you've earned here. The implications hit like a physical blow. Not only was Marcus trying to reclaim the money she'd taken, he was trying to take what she'd earned since leaving. Everything she'd built toward independence, toward freedom, he wanted to strip it all away. He can't do that, Ronan said flatly. He can try. Whether he'll succeed is another matter, but the writ's been filed with a judge in Cheyenne. I've been asked to serve notice, and Dalton pulled a folded paper from his jacket, and to collect any wages currently owed to Mrs. Vance to be held in escrow pending the court's decision. Absolutely not, Ronan said. Mr. Hale, I don't like this any more than you do, but it's a legal order. From a judge who heard one side of the story from a liar, Ronan's voice could have cut glass. You know Marcus Vance? Talked to him? I have. He seems like a reasonable man, concerned about his wife. He's a gambler and a manipulator who drove his wife away through financial abuse and threats, Ronan interrupted. And now he's using the law to continue that abuse. You're going to help him do it? Sheriff Dalton's jaw tightened. I'm doing my job, Mr. Hale. Following the law, even when I don't particularly like what it requires. The law, Ronan said coldly, isn't always just. No, but it's what we've got. Dalton turned to Mara. Ma'am, I'm sorry. Truly. But I need to ask, have you been paid wages for this month? Mara wanted to lie, wanted to say no, that Ronan hadn't paid her yet, but she'd never been good at lying, and her face gave her away. I have, she said quietly. Then I'm required to collect. You're not taking anything from this ranch, Ronan said. His voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. Sheriff, I respect your position, but that money was paid as wages for services rendered. It's not community property subject to a husband's claim. It's earned income. And until a judge specifically rules otherwise, it stays exactly where it is. Mr. Hale, if you obstruct this order, then Marcus Vance can add it to his list of grievances, and we'll settle it all in court at once. Ronan crossed his arms, his posture making it clear the conversation was over. You've served your notice. Now you can leave. Dalton looked between them, clearly calculating whether this was worth escalating. Finally, he sighed and tucked the paper back into his jacket. I'll report that notice was served, but collection was refused pending legal counsel review, he said. That'll buy you a little time, but Mr. Hale, you're making this harder than it needs to be. No, Marcus Vance is making this harder than it needs to be. I'm just refusing to make it easy for him. After the sheriff left, Mara sank into a chair, shaking with a combination of anger and fear. He's going to destroy everything. Even if I win the divorce, even if the theft charges don't stick, he's going to tie me up in legal battles until there's nothing left. Not if we hit back harder. Ronan was already moving to the office, pulling out paper. Sarah needs to know about this. We'll file a counter-motion, claim harassment, push for an emergency hearing on the divorce, and we'll document everything, every threat, every legal maneuver, every attempt to control you through the courts. That could take months, years even. Then we'll fight for months or years, however long it takes. He looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Mara, I'm not letting him win. Not because of the ranch's reputation, or the money, or any of that. I'm not letting him win because you deserve better. You deserve to be free. Why? The question burst out before she could stop it. Why does it matter so much to you? I'm just an employee, just someone who... You're not just anything, Ronan interrupted. His voice was rough, uneven. You're the reason I remember what it feels like to want something other than work. You're the reason this house feels like more than just a place I sleep. You're the reason I started staying for breakfast instead of grabbing coffee and leaving. You're the reason I... He stopped, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily. You're the reason I started hoping again, he finished quietly. After 12 years of just surviving, And I'll be damned if I let some bastard from your past take that away. Mara couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at this man who'd spent over a decade building walls against exactly this kind of vulnerability, now standing in front of her with his heart laid bare. Ronan, I know the timing's terrible, he said quickly. I know you've got enough to deal with without me complicating things. But you asked why it matters, and that's why. Because somewhere between you showing up half drowned and now, you became the most important thing in my life. And I'm not good at this, at feelings or words or any of it, but I needed you to know. The silence that followed was deafening. Mara's mind raced, trying to process the enormity of what he'd just confessed. Part of her wanted to run again, to protect herself from the risk of carrying this much. But a larger part, the part that had started healing in this place, with this man, wanted to be brave enough to reach back. I'm terrified, she whispered, of feeling this way, of trusting again, of believing that maybe this time it's real. It's real, Ronan said. I don't know much about love or romance or whatever the novels call it, but I know what I feel is real, and I know I'd rather fail at this than never try at all. Mara stood, closing the distance between them. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the roughness of his jaw, the warmth of his skin. He stood perfectly still, as if afraid that moving might shatter the moment. Marcus is going to use this against us if he finds out, she said. He'll claim you seduced me, that I'm an adulteress, that let him try. We'll have the truth on our side. The truth doesn't always win in court. Then we'll make sure it does. Ronan's hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his face. Mara, I can't promise this will be easy. I can't promise we won't face consequences, but I can promise I won't abandon you. Whatever happens, whatever he throws at us, we face it together. Together. Such a simple word, but it held everything Mara had been afraid to want. She made her choice. Rising on her toes, she kissed him. It was tentative at first, both of them uncertain of this new territory. But then Ronan's good arm came around her waist, pulling her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ronan rested his forehead against hers. We're going to fight him, he said, and we're going to win. How can you be so sure? Because I've spent 12 years winning battles against impossible odds, and I've never had this much to fight for. The next morning, Mara woke to find Ronan already gone. Not unusual given his work schedule, but there was a note on the kitchen table written in his careful, precise hand. Writing to Cheyenne to meet with Sarah in person. Need to strategize Marcus's latest moves. Tom has instructions. You're not to leave the ranch grounds until I return. Should be back by nightfall. Don't do anything reckless while I'm gone. Mara smiled despite herself. Even his love notes were practical and commanding. Mrs. Chen found her reading the note and chuckled. That man's idea of sweet talk is telling you not to get killed while he's away. It's actually kind of endearing. It really is, Mara agreed. The day passed slowly. Mara threw herself into work, managing correspondence, reviewing supply orders, planning meals for the week. Anything to keep her mind off the worries circling like vultures. What would Sarah say about Marcus's latest legal maneuver? How much would this all cost? How long could they sustain this kind of fight? And underneath it all, the deeper question, what happened after? If they won, if she was truly free, what then? Ronan had confessed his feelings, and she'd kissed him, but they'd made no promises beyond fighting together. Neither of them had spoken about a future, about what their relationship might look like without the constant threat of Marcus looming over them. She was still wrestling with these thoughts when Tom appeared at the kitchen door, his expression grim. Mrs. Vance, we've got a situation. Mara's heart sank. What kind of situation? Riders approaching, 6 of them, led by your husband. Of course, Ronan was gone, the ranch's protection temporarily reduced, and Marcus had chosen exactly this moment to make his move. Mara straightened her spine. Get the men ready. I want everyone visible, armed, and making it very clear he's not welcome. Already done. But ma'am, Tom hesitated. He's got the sheriff with him this time, and some official-looking fellow who's probably a lawyer. This was worse than she'd thought. Marcus wasn't just coming for a confrontation, he was coming with legal authority behind him. She met them in the yard, Mrs. Chen standing firmly at her side. Marcus sat his horse with that familiar, arrogant ease, looking like he'd already won. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. The third man, older, expensively dressed, surveyed the ranch with calculating eyes. "Mrs. Vance," the older man said, dismounting. "I'm Jonathan Pierce, attorney representing Mr. Marcus Vance in the matter of marital property and restitution. I have here a court order requiring you to return with your husband to Colorado to answer charges of theft and to fulfill your marital obligations." He held out a document, official-looking and stamped with seals. Mara's hands trembled as she took it, but she kept her voice steady. "I have legal representation. All matters should go through Sarah Coldwell in Cheyenne." "Ms. Coldwell has been notified," Pierce said smoothly. "However, this order supersedes any preliminary divorce filings. Until the court rules on the validity of your marriage and the theft charges, you're required to return to Colorado with your husband." "I'm not going anywhere with him." "Then you'll be held in contempt of court," Pierce said, "which carries its own penalties, including arrest and forfeiture of any disputed assets." Marcus finally spoke, his voice oozing false concern. "Mara, darling, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Come home. We'll settle this privately, like civilized people. Drop the theft charges, work out our differences." "Work out our differences?" Mara's laugh was bitter. "You mean go back to being your unpaid servant while you gamble away everything we have?" "That's your version of events. The court will hear mine too." Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "And I think they'll be very interested to learn about your living arrangements here. Sharing a house with a man who's not your husband. Taking wages that legally belong to me. It paints a certain picture, doesn't it? A picture you're deliberately distorting." "The law is the law, Mrs. Vance," Pierce interrupted. "And the law says a wife's earnings belong to her husband unless legally separated. You're not legally separated. Therefore, Mr. Vance has every right to claim those earnings and to require your return to the marital home." Tom stepped forward, hand on his gun. "She's not going anywhere." "Mr. Brennan, I'd advise against interfering with a court order," Sheriff Dalton said wearily. "I don't want to arrest anyone today." "Then don't," a new voice called out. Everyone turned. Ronan was riding hard up the road, a woman in a severe gray suit beside him. Even from a distance, Mara could feel the force of his anger. He pulled up in a spray of dust, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. The woman followed more sedately, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the scene. "Sarah Coldwell," she introduced herself to Pierce. "Miss Vance's attorney." "And you are?" "Jonathan Pierce, representing—" "I know who you represent," Sarah interrupted. "I also know that the order you're attempting to enforce is based on incomplete information and has been challenged in federal court as of 3 hours ago." She produced her own document, equally official-looking. Pierce's expression soured as he read it. "You can't just—" "I can, and I have," Sarah said crisply. "Judge Morrison in Cheyenne has issued a stay on all orders pending a full hearing on the marital status and financial claims. That hearing is scheduled for 2 weeks from today. Until then, Ms. Vance is under no obligation to return to Colorado or to surrender any assets." This is highly irregular. What's irregular is attempting to enforce a writ that violates federal statutes protecting women from financial coercion by abusive spouses. Sarah's voice could have frozen water. The Married Women's Property Act of 1870 gives Ms. Vance the right to own and control her own earnings. Your client's attempt to circumvent that law through dubious theft charges is transparent harassment. Marcus's face darkened. "Now see here." "No, you see here," Ronan said, his voice dangerously quiet. He moved to stand beside Mara, his presence solid and protective. "You've made your play. You've tried intimidation, legal manipulation, public opinion, and it's not working. Mara's not going back to you. Not now, not ever. So you can accept that and move on with your life, or you can keep fighting and lose everything when the truth comes out in court." "The truth?" Marcus's laugh was ugly. "The truth is that you've been harboring my wife, likely seducing her, definitely interfering in my marriage. Your marriage ended the moment you raised your hand to your wife's belongings in anger," Ronan interrupted. "The moment you gambled away her security. The moment you made her feel like a prisoner instead of a partner. It was over long before she found the courage to leave." You know nothing about my marriage. I know enough. Ronan's voice dropped lower. I know what fear looks like. I know what survival looks like. And I know the difference between a woman who's running away and a woman who's running towards something better. Mara's done with you, Vance. The only question is whether you're smart enough to accept it. The standoff stretched taut. Marcus looked between Ronan and Mara, calculation clear in his eyes. He was weighing his options, deciding if this fight was worth continuing. Finally, Pierce cleared his throat. Mr. Vance, given the federal stay, we should regroup and prepare for the hearing. Attempting to enforce the original order now would be legally problematic. Marcus's jaw clenched so hard Mara could see the muscle jumping, but he nodded curtly. 2 weeks, he said to Mara. 2 weeks, and then we settle this in court. Bring your best case, darling, because I'm bringing mine, and we'll see who the judge believes, a concerned husband or a runaway wife with a new man warming her bed. The crude implication made Tom step forward again, but Ronan's hand on his shoulder stopped him. Leave, Ronan said simply. Now, before I decide that protecting my property includes removing trespassers by force. Marcus wheeled his horse around, Pierce and the sheriff following. But before riding off, Marcus turned back one last time. You think you've won something here, Hale, but all you've done is make this more expensive for everyone. I hope she's worth it. She is, Ronan said without hesitation, more than you ever deserved. They watched the riders leave, and only when they were completely out of sight did Mara allow herself to breathe. That was close, she whispered. Too close, Sarah agreed. But we bought ourselves time, 2 weeks to build an airtight case. Mr. Hale filled me in on everything during our ride from Cheyenne. I have to say, I've handled a lot of divorce cases, but this one's particularly vindictive. Marcus doesn't like losing, Mara said. Well, he's about to learn what real loss looks like. Sarah's smile was sharp. Because I don't like bullies, and I really don't like men who use the law to terrorize women. So let's make sure that hearing goes our way. That night, after Sarah had been settled in the guest room and Mrs. Chen had retired, Ronan found Mara on the front porch. She was staring out at the dark expanse of the ranch, lost in thought. You should be sleeping, he said, sitting beside her. Can't. Too much running through my head. Want to share? Mara considered, then decided truth was easier than deflection. I'm scared. Not of Marcus. I mean, I am, but that's not the main thing. I'm scared of what happens after. If we win, if I'm truly free, what then? Then you live your life however you want. Is that what I'd be doing? Living however I want? Or would I just be trading one obligation for another? Ronan was quiet for a moment. You think staying here would be an obligation? I think, Mara struggled to find the right words. I think I need to know that whatever happens between us, it's because I chose it. Not because I owe you, not because I need protection, not because circumstances forced us together. I need to know it's real. It's real for me, Ronan said quietly. But I understand what you're saying. You need to choose me without pressure, without debt, with complete freedom. Yes. Then, after the hearing, after the divorce is final, you take time, figure out what you want. I'll keep paying your wages, keep your position here, but no pressure, no expectations. You decide what happens next. You do that? Just wait? I waited 12 years for something to matter enough to risk caring about it, Ronan said. I can wait however long it takes for you to be sure. Mara felt tears prick her eyes. This man, who'd built walls so high nothing could breach them, was offering her complete freedom to choose. No manipulation, no coercion, no strings. It was the opposite of everything Marcus had ever given her. Thank you, she whispered. Ronan reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and solid. We'll get through the hearing. We'll get you free. And then we'll see what comes next. Together or separate, whatever you need. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars come out over the ranch that had become her sanctuary. In 2 weeks, everything would change. The hearing would determine her legal status, her freedom, her future. But sitting here with Ronan's hand in hers, Mara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, genuine hope that maybe the future didn't have to be about survival. Maybe it could be about actually living. Maybe it could be about love. The 2 weeks before the hearing passed in a blur of preparation and tension. Sarah Coldwell transformed the ranch office into a war room, covering every surface with documents, depositions, and legal precedents. She interviewed Mrs. Chen, Tom, and several of the ranch hands about Mara's character and work ethic. She compiled financial records proving that Mara had earned every cent Marcus was trying to claim. She found witnesses in Colorado willing to testify about Marcus's gambling debts and violent temper. "This is solid," Sarah told them on the 5th day, reviewing her case file. "Really solid. But we need to be prepared for him to get ugly. Men like Marcus don't fight fair when they're cornered." She was right. 3 days before the hearing, a story appeared in the Cheyenne newspaper. It was carefully worded to avoid direct libel, but the implications were clear. A prominent rancher harboring another man's wife, questions about the propriety of their living arrangements, concerns about moral character in Wyoming's business community. Ronan read the article with a clenched jaw, then crumpled the paper and threw it across the room. "He paid for this," he said flatly. "Every word reeks of Marcus." "Of course he did," Sarah agreed. "He's trying to poison public opinion before the hearing, make you look like a homewrecker, make Mara look like an adulteress. Classic strategy." "Will it work?" Mara asked, her voice tight. "Not if we control the narrative." Sarah's smile was sharp. "I have contacts at 3 different papers. By tomorrow, they'll be running stories about women's rights, about the Married Women's Property Act, about husbands who use the legal system to abuse their wives. We'll make this about the law, not about morality." She was true to her word. Within 48 hours, the conversation had shifted. Editorial writers debated women's property rights. Women's advocacy groups issued statements supporting Mara's case. The court of public opinion was turning, slowly but surely. But Marcus had one more card to play. The night before they were set to leave for Cheyenne, Ronan was doing final checks on the horses when he heard the shot. It came from the direction of the north pasture, a single crack that sent birds scattering into the twilight sky. Ronan was running before his mind fully processed what he'd heard. Tom and 3 other hands converging from different directions. They found the fence cut, a section of cattle missing, and Jimmy Carson on the ground, clutching his arm where a bullet had grazed him. "3 men!" Jimmy gasped, his face pale with pain and anger. "Cut!" Came out of nowhere, cut the fence, started driving the cattle north. I tried to stop them, and one of them shot me. "Did you recognize them?" Tom demanded, already tearing fabric for a bandage. "Never seen them before, but one of them, he said something before they rode off. Said to tell Mr. Hale this is what happens when you protect what ain't yours." Ronan's blood went cold. "Get Jimmy to Doc Miller. Now, and get every man we have out looking for those cattle." "Boss, this is a distraction," Tom said quietly. "They want us scattered, searching when we should be getting ready for tomorrow." "I know what it is." Ronan's voice was ice and fury. "But we can't just let them steal our stock. You take half the men and track them. I'll stay here with the rest, make sure there are no more surprises." They worked through the night. Tom's group found the cattle 5 miles north, abandoned and scattered but unharmed. The rustlers were long gone, leaving no trail that could be followed in the dark. "They just wanted to cause chaos," Tom reported when they returned just before dawn. "Wanted us tired and distracted for the hearing." "Then we don't give them the satisfaction." Ronan looked at his exhausted men. "Everyone who's not essential stays here and gets some sleep. Tom, you're coming with us to Cheyenne in case we need testimony about tonight. The rest of you, fortify this place. If anyone tries anything else, I want them to regret it." The ride to Cheyenne was tense and silent. Ronan drove the wagon with Mara beside him, Sarah and Tom following on horseback. None of them had slept more than an hour or 2, and the weight of what was coming pressed down like a physical thing. "He's getting desperate," Sarah observed when they stopped to water the horses. "The rustling, the newspaper articles, all of it. That's actually good for us. Desperate men make mistakes." "What if he makes a mistake that ruins everything?" Mara asked. "Then we adapt. That's what good lawyers do." Sarah squeezed Mara's shoulder. "Trust me, I've seen worse cases than this. We're going to win." The hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock at the federal courthouse. They arrived at 9 to find Marcus already there, flanked by Jonathan Pierce and 2 other lawyers Mara didn't recognize. Marcus looked polished and confident, every inch the wronged husband seeking justice. When he saw Mara, his expression shifted to something that might have passed for concern if you didn't know him. "Mara," he said, approaching, "you look tired. This has been hard on you, I can tell. It doesn't have to be this way. We could still settle this privately without dragging everything through the courts." "No," Mara said clearly. "We settle this here, legally or not at all." Marcus's mask slipped for just a second, something ugly flashing in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by wounded dignity. "I see. Well, I tried." He glanced at Ronan, standing protectively at Mara's side. "I hope you know what you're doing, Hale. Courts don't look kindly on men who interfere in marriages." "Courts don't look kindly on men who abuse their wives, either," Ronan replied evenly. "Guess we'll see which one matters more." The courtroom was smaller than Mara expected, wood-paneled and formal. Judge Morrison was a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Mara felt a flicker of hope. A female judge might understand in a way a man wouldn't. "This is a hearing to determine the validity of property claims and to rule on a petition for divorce," Judge Morrison said once everyone was seated. "Mr. Pierce, you're representing Marcus Vance. Ms. Coldwell, you're representing Mara Vance. Both parties have submitted extensive documentation. I've reviewed it all. Now I want to hear testimony." Pierce went first, painting Marcus as a devoted husband whose wife had abandoned him without cause, stealing their savings in the process. He called witnesses who testified that Marcus was a respected member of his community, a businessman of good standing. He presented gambling receipts that he claimed showed recreational betting, nothing more. It was a masterful performance. Mara felt her hope wavering as witness after witness spoke of Marcus's good character, his reasonable nature, his obvious distress at his wife's departure. Then Sarah stood up. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Mara Vance to the stand." Mara's heart hammered as she walked to the witness box. She swore to tell the truth and sat, trying not to look at Marcus, who was watching her with that same false concern. Sarah started gently, establishing the timeline of the marriage, the early happiness that had slowly curdled into control and manipulation. "Mrs. Vance, can you describe your husband's gambling habits?" "He gambled constantly," Mara said, keeping her voice steady. "At first it was occasional poker games. Then it became every night, sometimes for days at a time. He'd come home having lost hundreds of dollars, then borrow more to try to win it back. And when you expressed concern about this, he told me I didn't understand business, that he was investing in opportunities, that I should be grateful he was trying to provide for us." Mara's hands clenched in her lap. "But we weren't living on his winnings. We were living on my earnings from seamstress work and what I made managing our household accounts. Every time I saved anything, he'd find it and gamble it away." "Did you ever feel unsafe in your marriage?" "Yes. He never hit me, but he threw things. Broke furniture. Once he destroyed my sewing machine because I told him I couldn't give him more money. He said if I wouldn't support him willingly, I wouldn't be able to support myself either." Pierce objected, claiming hearsay and exaggeration. Judge Morrison allowed the testimony but instructed the court reporter to note the objection. Sarah continued, methodically building the case. She presented the financial records showing that every cent Mara had taken was earned by her own labor. She called witnesses from Colorado who testified about Marcus's debts, his threats, his pattern of manipulation. Then she called Tom Brennan. Tom described the night Marcus had come to the ranch with armed men, the threats, the attempts to intimidate. He testified about the rustling incident the previous night, about the message that had been delivered. "And in your observation, Mr. Brennan, how would you characterize Mrs. Vance's work at the ranch?" "She's the best employee Mr. Hale's ever had," Tom said bluntly. "Works harder than most men I know. She's honest, capable, and she's earned every cent she's been paid. Anyone who says different is lying." Finally, Sarah called Ronan. He walked to the stand with the same controlled intensity he brought to everything. When he swore his oath, his voice was clear and firm. "Mr. Hale, what was your initial impression of Mrs. Vance?" "That she was stubborn, competent, and not interested in being rescued," Ronan said. "She made it clear from the start that she wanted to work, to earn her place. She wasn't looking for charity or protection, she was looking for a chance. And you gave her that chance. Why?" "Because I recognized something in her." Ronan's gaze found Mara's across the courtroom. Someone who'd survived something difficult and refused to let it break them. Someone who understood that strength isn't about never falling, it's about getting back up. Has your relationship with Mrs. Vance ever been improper? No, Ronan said firmly. She's been my employee. We've developed friendship and respect. But until she's legally free to make her own choices without coercion, I've made sure our relationship remained professional. Pierce stood for cross-examination, trying to twist Ronan's words into evidence of an affair, of impropriety. But Ronan was immovable, answering each question with calm precision. Mr. Hale, isn't it true that you've paid Mrs. Vance's legal fees in this matter? Yes. And doesn't that create a certain obligation? A sense that she owes you? No, it creates a debt which she's insisted on repaying. But obligation and debt aren't the same thing. I'm helping her because it's the right thing to do, not because I expect anything in return. Oh, how convenient that you're able to draw such fine distinctions. It's not convenient, Ronan said. It's the truth. Something your client seems to have trouble recognizing. Judge Morrison called a recess for lunch. Mara, Ronan, and Sarah huddled in a small room adjacent to the courthouse. It's going well, Sarah said. Morrison's been taking a lot of notes during my questioning. That's usually a good sign. Marcus looked smug during Pierce's cross-examination of Ronan, Mara worried. Pierce is good at looking confident even when he's losing. Don't read too much into it. Sarah reviewed her notes. This afternoon they'll call rebuttal witnesses. Marcus will probably testify himself. Be prepared. He's going to try to make you look like the villain. She was right. When court resumed, Marcus took the stand and delivered a performance that would have impressed theater critics. He spoke of his love for Mara, his devastation at her departure, his genuine concern for her welfare. He denied the gambling allegations, explained away the debts as business investments, and painted himself as a man desperate to save his marriage. I just want my wife back, he said, his voice breaking convincingly. I want us to work through our problems together, the way married couples should. Instead, she's been poisoned against me by people who have their own interests at heart. He looked directly at Ronan when he said it. Sarah's cross-examination was brutal. Mr. Vance, you claim to love your wife, yet you had her followed, threatened her employer, and attempted to seize her wages through dubious legal means. Is that love? I was trying to protect what's mine. Your wife is not property, Mr. Vance. Under the law, Sarah interrupted. The Married Women's Property Act of 1870 grants women the right to own and control their own earnings. Were you aware of that law when you filed for your wife's wages? Marcus faltered. My lawyers advised me of my rights as a husband. Your rights as a husband do not supersede your wife's rights as an individual. Let me ask you plainly, did you or did you not gamble away the majority of your household savings between 1883 and 1885? I made some investments that didn't pan out. I'm not asking about investments. I'm asking about gambling, poker specifically, sometimes for stakes of several $100s per night. Occasionally I played cards, but I have depositions from 3 saloon owners in Colorado documenting your debts to their establishments, totaling over $2,000. Do you dispute those figures? Marcus's composure cracked. Those men are lying. They're trying to collect debts I don't owe. So it's a conspiracy? Multiple business owners all lying about your debts? I'm saying they're exaggerating. And when your wife tried to leave this situation, you destroyed her sewing machine, correct? That was an accident that happened during an argument about money, an accident that conveniently prevented her from earning independent income. Pierce objected repeatedly, but Judge Morrison allowed most of Sarah's questions. By the time she was finished, Marcus looked rattled and angry, his carefully constructed facade in tatters. The final testimony came from an unexpected source. A woman Mara didn't recognize took the stand, introduced as Mrs. Eleanor Hastings from Colorado. Mrs. Hastings, how do you know the Vances? Sarah asked. I was their neighbor for 3 years, lived in the apartment next to theirs. And what did you observe during that time? I heard the fights, Mrs. Hastings said quietly. Almost every night toward the end, Mr. Vance shouting, things breaking, Mrs. Vance crying. One time I knocked on the door to make sure she was all right, and she had a bruise on her arm. She said she'd fallen, but the woman's voice hardened. I know what falling looks like versus what being grabbed looks like. I've got 5 brothers. I know the difference. Marcus surged to his feet. That's a lie. I never laid a hand on her. Mr. Vance, sit down, Judge Morrison said sharply. You'll have your chance to respond. But the damage was done. The jury, and more importantly, the judge, had seen Marcus lose control, had seen the mask slip completely. Pierce tried to salvage things and redirect, but Mrs. Hastings wouldn't budge from her testimony. She'd seen what she'd seen, and no amount of legal maneuvering would change it. When testimony concluded, both lawyers gave closing arguments. Pierce appealed to tradition, to the sanctity of marriage, to the importance of upholding a husband's rights. Sarah appealed to justice, to the law protecting women's autonomy, to the obvious pattern of abuse and control. Then Judge Morrison called a 30-minute recess to make her decision. Those 30 minutes felt like 30 hours. Mara sat in the hallway, Ronan beside her, neither speaking. There was nothing left to say. Everything that could be done had been done. Now it was in the judge's hands. When they were called back in, Judge Morrison's expression was unreadable. I've considered all the testimony and evidence presented, she began. This is a complex case touching on marriage law, property rights, and questions of autonomy and abuse. I'll address each issue in turn. Mara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. First, the question of theft. Based on the financial records provided, I find that the money in question was earned by Mrs. Vance through her own labor. While marriage creates a partnership, it does not give either spouse unlimited rights to the other's earnings. The funds Mrs. Vance took when she left were hers by right. The theft charges are dismissed. Relief flooded through Mara, but it was premature. The real question was still coming. Second, the question of marital property and wages earned during separation. Mr. Vance has claimed rights to his wife's earnings at the Hale Ranch. However, the evidence shows a clear pattern of financial abuse and coercive control. Under these circumstances, enforcing such a claim would perpetuate the very abuse the law is meant to prevent. That claim is also dismissed. Marcus's face was turning red, but Pierce put a restraining hand on his arm. Finally, the petition for divorce. Mrs. Vance has cited abandonment, financial abuse, and irreconcilable differences. Mr. Vance contests these grounds. However, the testimony and evidence paint a clear picture of a marriage characterized by deception, manipulation, and control. No woman should be forced to remain in such circumstances. Judge Morrison paused, looking directly at Mara. The petition for divorce is granted. The marriage between Marcus Vance and Mara Vance is hereby dissolved. Mrs. Vance is free to resume her maiden name if she wishes, and is under no legal obligation to her former husband. Mr. Vance, you are enjoined from contacting, harassing, or attempting to coerce Ms. Vance in any way. Violation of this order will result in criminal charges. Are we clear? Your Honor, this is outrageous, Marcus started. Are we clear, Mr. Vance? Judge Morrison's voice could have cut glass. Marcus subsided, fury radiating from every line of his body. Yes, Your Honor. Good. This hearing is concluded. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. For a moment, Mara couldn't move, couldn't process what had just happened. Free. She was free. Legally, officially free. Then Ronan's hand found hers, squeezing gently, and the reality crashed over her like a wave. She turned to him, tears streaming down her face, and he pulled her into his arms right there in the courtroom, not caring who saw. It's over, he murmured into her hair. You're free. Sarah was grinning like she'd won the lottery. That was beautiful. Morrison didn't just rule in our favor. She eviscerated his case. He can appeal, but no appellate court is going to overturn that decision. You're done with him, Mara. Truly done. Marcus stormed out of the courtroom, Pierce and his other lawyers trailing behind. As he passed, he locked eyes with Mara one last time. You'll regret this, he said quietly, viciously. You think you've won, but you've just destroyed any chance of a decent life. No one's going to want a divorced woman with nothing to her name. I want her, Ronan said, his voice carrying absolute certainty. And that's all that matters. Marcus's laugh was bitter and broken. We'll see how long that lasts. Then he was gone, and Mara felt the last chains fall away. They stayed in Cheyenne that night, taking rooms at a modest hotel. Sarah left the next morning, promising to file all the final paperwork and send copies to the ranch. You did good, she told Mara at the train station. Not many women have the courage to fight like you did. Be proud of yourself. I couldn't have done it without you. You could have. It would have just taken longer and been messier, Sarah smiled. But I'm glad I could help. Now go live your life and send me a telegram when something wonderful happens, so I can say I knew you win. The ride back to the ranch was quiet but peaceful. The tension that had coiled around them for weeks was finally gone, leaving behind something lighter, gentler. Possibility. Tom had held down the fort in their absence, and the ranch hands greeted their return with genuine relief. Word had somehow spread about the hearing's outcome. Telegraph lines carried news fast, and there was a celebratory atmosphere in the bunkhouse that night. But Mara and Ronan didn't join the celebration. They sat on the porch as the sun set, watching the day fade into twilight. I meant what I said, Ronan told her, about giving you time, space to figure out what you want. That offer still stands. Mara was quiet for a long moment, thinking about everything that had brought her to this point. The river that had nearly killed her. The man who'd pulled her from it. The months of slowly learning that not all strength looked like walls, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let someone in. I don't need time, she said finally. I already know what I want. Ronan turned to face her, hope and fear warring in his expression. What's that? This, you, a life we build together, not because we need each other, but because we choose each other. Mara took his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the warmth, the strength. I spent years in a marriage where I had no choice, where every decision was made for me or in spite of me. I don't want that ever again, but what I do want is a partnership. Someone who sees me as an equal, who values what I bring, who doesn't try to diminish me to make himself feel bigger. I could never diminish you, Ronan said. You're the strongest person I've ever met. And you're the first person who ever made me feel like strength was something to celebrate instead of hide. Mara moved closer, until their shoulders touched. I love you, Ronan Hale. Not because you saved me, though you did. Not because you protected me, though you did that too. I love you because you saw me at my worst and never once treated me like I was broken. You saw someone worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth building something real with. Ronan's breath caught. Mara, I know you're not good with words. I know expressing feelings makes you uncomfortable. So let me say enough for both of us. She turned fully to face him, cupping his face in her hands. I choose you. Every day for the rest of my life, if you'll have me. Not as your employee, not as someone under your protection, as your partner, your equal, your... He kissed her before she could finish, pulling her close with an intensity that spoke louder than any words could. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ronan rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said, the words rough but real. I don't know how to do this, relationships, partnership, any of it, but I want to learn, with you. I want to build something that isn't just about survival or duty or keeping the world at arm's length. I want to build a life. Then let's build one, Mara whispered. Marry me. The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Mara pulled back just far enough to see his face. Are you sure? We don't have to rush. We could just... I'm sure, Ronan interrupted. I've never been more sure of anything. I spent 12 years alone because I thought it was safer. But you taught me that safe isn't the same as living, and I don't want to be safe anymore. I want to be yours. Completely, legally, in every way that matters. Yes, Mara said, tears streaming down her face again. But happy tears this time. Joyful tears. Yes, I'll marry you. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Mrs. Chen cried happy tears and insisted on making a feast that could have fed half the territory. Tom stood up as Ronan's best man, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday suit but grinning broadly. Sarah Coldwell came all the way from Cheyenne to witness it, joking that she wanted to make sure this marriage was properly legal so she'd never have to divorce Mara again. The ranch hands decorated the barn with wildflowers and lanterns. As the sun set, Mara walked down an aisle made of hay bales wearing a simple white dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew. It wasn't fancy or elegant, but it was hers, chosen freely, worn proudly. Ronan waited at the makeshift altar, and when Mara saw his face, The raw emotion, the love, the absolute certainty. She knew that this was what marriage was supposed to be. Not ownership or obligation, but choice. Mutual, equal, freely given. The minister from Red Hollow kept the ceremony short, sensing that neither bride nor groom was interested in lengthy speeches. When it came time for vows, Ronan spoke first. "I'm not good at pretty words," he said, his voice carrying to everyone gathered. "But I can promise you this. I'll never try to make you smaller to make myself bigger. I'll never ask you to be less than you are. I'll stand beside you, not in front of you. I'll build with you, not for you. And I'll love you exactly as you are, for exactly as long as you'll have me." Mara had planned a whole speech, had practiced it in the mirror for days. But standing there, looking at this man who'd learned to tear down his walls for her, all those planned words disappeared. "You already know I love you," she said simply. "But here's what you might not know. You didn't just save my life that day in the river. You gave me a reason to want to be saved. You showed me that strength can be gentle, that walls can have doors, and that the scariest thing in the world is also the most worthwhile. I promise to choose you every day, to build this life with you as true partners, and to never ever let you forget that you're worth choosing." There wasn't a dry eye in the barn. When the minister pronounced them married, Ronan kissed his wife with a tenderness that made even the hardened ranch hands look away to give them a moment of privacy. The celebration lasted well into the night. The men drank and toasted the happy couple. Mrs. Chen's feast was devoured with enthusiasm. Someone produced a fiddle, and despite having no formal dancing experience, Ronan waltzed with his new wife under the lantern light while everyone cheered. Later, much later, when the guests had finally dispersed and the ranch had settled into peaceful silence, Mara and Ronan stood together on the porch of their home. Their home. Not his, not hers. Theirs. "Thank you," Mara said softly. "For what?" "For being brave enough to let me in. I know it wasn't easy." Ronan pulled her close, his arms around her waist, her back against his chest as they looked out over the land that stretched before them. "Nothing worthwhile is easy," he said. "You taught me that." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one over the ranch that had become their sanctuary and their future. In the months that followed, Mara transformed from employee to true partner in every sense. She took over the financial management completely, her skill with numbers and negotiations increasing their profits by 30% in the first year alone. She expanded the household operations, adding a dairy and vegetable garden that not only fed the ranch but provided surplus to sell in town. She became known throughout the territory as someone whose word was gold, whose business sense was sharp, and whose kindness never wavered. Ronan, for his part, learned to delegate, to trust, to let others share the burden he'd carried alone for so long. With Mara beside him, he expanded the ranch further, purchased breeding stock that became legendary, and built a reputation as a fair employer and honest businessman. But more than the business success, they built a life. A real life full of small moments and quiet joys. Breakfast conversations that stretched into lunch. Evenings reviewing accounts that turned into debates about philosophy or laughter over shared memories. Sunday mornings when they'd ride out to the far pastures just to be alone together, away from the world. The town of Red Hollow, which had once whispered about the impropriety of their arrangement, came to see them as a model of what partnership could look like. Other women trapped in situations similar to what Mara had escaped would sometimes appear at the ranch seeking advice or help. Mara never turned them away. With Sarah Coldwell's assistance, she helped more than a dozen women escape abusive marriages and start fresh lives. Marcus Vance disappeared from their lives completely. Rumor had it he'd moved to California, still gambling, still losing. Mara sometimes thought about him, wondered if he'd ever learned anything from their failed marriage. But mostly, she didn't think about him at all. He was the past, and she'd learned that the past only had as much power as you gave it. 2 years after their wedding, on a warm spring morning, Mara told Ronan she was pregnant. He stood frozen for a full minute, processing. Then, without a word, he swept her into his arms and spun her around, laughing, actually laughing, with a joy so pure it brought tears to both their eyes. "I'm going to be a father," he said, wonder in his voice. "We're going to be parents," Mara corrected. "Partners in this too." Their daughter was born in early winter, arriving during a snowstorm that reminded Ronan painfully of the night he'd lost his parents. But this time, the snow brought life instead of death. They named her Eleanor Rose, Eleanor for Mrs. Hastings, whose testimony had helped free Mara, and Rose for the wild roses that grew on the ranch, beautiful and resilient. Ronan held his daughter with the same careful strength he'd once held Mara in the river, protective, gentle, absolutely determined to keep her safe. But Mara made sure he understood. Safe didn't mean sheltered. Their daughter would grow up knowing her own strength, making her own choices, understanding that love was something you chose, not something imposed. As Eleanor grew, the ranch grew with her. More land, more cattle, more success. But the real growth was measured in other ways. In the laughter that now filled the house regularly, in the way Ronan had learned to express his feelings without it feeling like pulling teeth, in the community they'd built around them of people who valued integrity and fairness over blind tradition. Tom Brennan eventually married Mrs. Chen's niece and became a permanent fixture of the ranch family. Jimmy Carson grew into one of the best horse trainers in Wyoming. The bunkhouse that had once been a lonely outpost became a place where men knew they'd be treated fairly and paid honestly. And through it all, Mara and Ronan stood together, not just surviving, but thriving, building something bigger than either of them could have built alone. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they stood in the same spot where Ronan had first found Mara in the river. The crossing had been improved over the years, made safer, but they still visited it sometimes. "You know what I think about?" Mara asked, looking at the water that no longer seemed quite so terrifying. "What's that?" "I think about how close I came to giving up that day, how easy it would have been to just let the river take me, to decide that surviving wasn't worth the effort." Ronan's arm tightened around her waist. "I'm glad you didn't. So am I. Because it turns out surviving was just the beginning. Living, really living, that's what came after." She looked up at him, this man who'd learned to tear down walls and build doors instead. "You gave me that. A reason to want more than just survival." "We gave each other that," Ronan corrected. "I was surviving too in my way, just going through the motions, building walls higher and higher. You taught me that walls keep things out, but they also keep you trapped." They stood in silence, watching the river flow. No longer an enemy, just another part of the landscape they'd learned to navigate together. Eleanor, now 8 years old and already showing signs of her mother's stubbornness and her father's quiet strength, called to them from the wagon where Mrs. Chen was unpacking their anniversary picnic. "Mama, Papa, come on, I'm hungry." "Some things never change," Mara laughed, taking Ronan's hand. As they walked back toward their daughter, toward the life they'd built from the ashes of their separate tragedies, Ronan stopped and pulled Mara close one more time. "I love you," he said. Simple words he'd once struggled to speak, now said easily, often. "I love you too," Mara replied. "Every day, every moment, for the rest of our lives." And that was exactly what they did. The man who'd spent 12 years letting no one in had learned that opening his heart wasn't weakness. It was the bravest thing he'd ever done. The woman who'd run from everything had learned that sometimes the most courageous act is choosing to stay, to fight, to build something worth keeping. Together, they'd taken broken pieces and made something whole. They'd taken fear and transformed it into love. They'd taken survival and turned it into a life worth living. On the wild frontier of Wyoming, where the land was harsh and life was harder, Ronan and Mara Hale proved that sometimes the greatest conquests aren't about taming the wilderness outside. Sometimes they're about finding the courage to tame the wilderness within, to tear down the walls we've built, to trust again after betrayal, to love again after loss. And when two people find that courage together, they don't just survive. They thrive. They build legacies. They create love stories that echo through generations, reminding everyone who hears them that the bravest thing any of us can do is choose to be vulnerable, to let someone in, to risk our hearts one more time. Because in the end, that's what love is. Not the absence of fear, but the decision that something, someone, is worth the fear, worth the risk, worth everything. And Mara and Ronan had found exactly that in each other. Worth everything. Worth it all. Worth a lifetime, and then some.